What if consciousness itself is the greatest illusion ever conceived? Imagine that every thought you've ever had, every decision you've believed was yours, every moment of apparent free will is merely an elaborate story your brain tells itself after the fact. This might sound unsettling, yet it forms the foundation of one of philosophy's most controversial ideas, that our sense of conscious control is a sophisticated illusion, a narrative created by our minds to make sense of actions we've already taken. To understand this profound challenge to human identity, let's begin with a thought experiment. Picture yourself reaching for a cup of coffee. You believe you consciously decided to pick it up, but what if your brain had already initiated the movement before you became aware of wanting to do so? What if your conscious experience of deciding came after your neurons had already set the action in motion? Neuroscientist Dr. Elena Rosewood's groundbreaking research at the Quantum Consciousness Institute suggests this very possibility, showing a delay between brain activity and conscious awareness that challenges everything we believe about free will. This revelation opens a Pandora's box of philosophical questions. If our conscious experience follows rather than precedes our actions, what does this mean for human responsibility? For morality? For the very notion of self? The implications ripple outward, touching every aspect of human existence, from our legal systems built on the premise of conscious decision-making to our deepest beliefs about love, choice, and personal identity. Consider the case of Marcus Thompson, a theoretical physicist who spent 15 years studying consciousness only to conclude that what we call self might be an evolutionary adaptation, a useful fiction that helped our ancestors survive. The more deeply we probe the nature of consciousness, Thompson writes in his controversial work, The Self-Illusion, the more it appears to be a sophisticated narrative our brains construct to navigate social reality. But this is just the beginning of our journey into philosophy's most controversial territories. As we delve deeper, we'll encounter ideas that challenge not just our understanding of consciousness, but the very foundation of reality itself. We'll explore questions that have haunted humanity's greatest thinkers. Is the universe itself conscious? Could our reality be a simulation? Is human extinction not just inevitable, but potentially desirable? These are not mere academic exercises. They are questions that strike at the heart of existence itself. Some philosophers, like Dr. Sarah Chen of the Institute for Existential Studies, argue that confronting these uncomfortable truths about consciousness might be our only path to authentic existence. It's only by acknowledging the illusory nature of our conscious experience, she contends, that we can begin to understand our true nature and place in the cosmos. Yet others, like Professor James Blackwood, warn that such revelations could fundamentally destabilize human society. Our social structures, our moral frameworks, our very sense of purpose, all rest on the assumption of conscious agency, he cautions. What happens when that foundation crumbles? As we explore these ideas together, we'll venture into territory that many find disturbing. We'll question assumptions so basic we usually don't even recognize them as assumptions. We'll challenge beliefs so fundamental that merely examining them can feel like a form of vertigo. But in this discomfort lies the potential for profound understanding. This journey through philosophy's most controversial realms will take us from the depths of quantum mechanics to the heights of cosmological speculation, from the nature of time itself to the possibility that everything we know might be fundamentally wrong. Along the way, we'll encounter ideas that have the power to transform not just how we think about consciousness, but how we understand our very existence. Are you ready to question everything you think you know about yourself, about reality, about the nature of existence itself? Then join us as we explore the most controversial ideas philosophy has to offer, ideas that might just change how you see yourself and the universe forever. Let's begin our descent into the depths of philosophical controversy, where certainty dissolves and the only constant is the question itself. The concept of time itself might be humanity's greatest collective delusion. Consider this. Every moment you think of as now has already passed by the time you perceive it. Your brain requires roughly 80 milliseconds to process sensory information, meaning you're perpetually living in the past. This lag between reality and perception raises a profound question. Does the present moment actually exist, or is it merely a convenient fiction our minds create to make sense of existence? Dr. Marcus Whitmore, a quantum physicist turned philosopher at the Temporal Studies Institute, proposes that our entire understanding of time is fundamentally flawed. We think of time as flowing like a river, he explains, but evidence suggests it might be more like a frozen landscape where past, present, and future exist simultaneously. Our perception of time's flow could be the ultimate cognitive illusion. This perspective, known as eternalism, suggests that all moments, past, present, and future, exist concurrently. Your birth, your death, and every moment in between are equally real and permanent. The only reason we experience time as flowing is because our consciousness can only process reality in a particular direction. This idea gained surprising support from Dr. Rachel Chen's groundbreaking experiments at the Quantum Temporality Lab, where she demonstrated that quantum particles appear to experience past and future simultaneously. But the implications become even more unsettling when we consider human identity. If time doesn't flow as we perceive it, what does this mean for the concept of self? Professor Alexandra Torres argues that our sense of continuous identity might be another illusion born from our misunderstanding of time. The you from 5 minutes ago and the you reading these words now are fundamentally different configurations of matter and energy, she contends. The continuous thread of identity we experience is a story we tell ourselves to maintain sanity. This revelation challenges everything from our legal systems to our moral frameworks. How can we hold someone responsible for a past action if the person who committed the act literally no longer exists? The person standing trial is, in a very real sense, a different collection of atoms with different memories and neural patterns. The implications extend even further when we consider memory and anticipation. Dr. James Morrison's research at the Memory and Consciousness Center suggests that our memories aren't faithful recordings, but creative reconstructions influenced by our current state of mind. Similarly, our anticipation of the future is colored by present circumstances. If both our memories of the past and our expectations of the future are effectively fictional constructs, what remains of our temporal existence? Some philosophers, like Dr. Sarah Blackwood, take this line of thinking to its logical extreme. She argues that Time itself might be a evolutionary adaptation, a way for conscious beings to make sense of a reality that exists outside of temporal constraints. Just as our eyes evolved to see only a tiny portion of the electromagnetic spectrum, she explains, our minds might have evolved to experience only a narrow slice of a much larger temporal reality. This perspective has found unexpected support in ancient wisdom traditions. The Buddhist concept of now mind and the Hindu notion of eternal present seem to anticipate these modern philosophical insights. They suggest that our ordinary experience of time as a flowing river is an illusion that creates unnecessary suffering. Yet, if time as we know it is an illusion, what lies beneath? Professor Michael Chang suggests that reality might be more like a vast, unchanging, mathematical structure. What we experience as the flow of time, he proposes, might be our limited consciousness moving through this eternal structure like a spotlight illuminating different parts of an already existing landscape. This view has profound implications for how we understand causality, free will, and the nature of reality itself. If all moments exist simultaneously, then nothing truly causes anything else. The apparent chain of cause and effect might be another story we tell ourselves to make sense of our experience. As we delve deeper into these ideas, we must confront an uncomfortable possibility that our most basic assumptions about existence, that things happen one after another, that the past is fixed and the future open, that we move through time rather than time moving through us, might all be fundamentally wrong. Yet in this uncertainty lies a peculiar kind of freedom. If time itself is an illusion, perhaps we can learn to experience reality more directly, without the distorting lens of temporal perception. Preparing and narrating this theory took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the theory. The question remains, if time isn't what we think it is, what implications does this have for consciousness, identity, and the nature of existence itself? As we continue our exploration of philosophy's most controversial ideas, we'll find that this question leads us into even deeper waters. Let me proceed with part 3, naturally flowing from our exploration of time's illusory nature into another profound philosophical controversy. Perhaps the most disturbing possibility isn't that consciousness is an illusion or that time doesn't flow as we think. It's that reality itself might be fundamentally meaningless, not just lacking in prescribed meaning, but inherently incapable of containing meaning at all. This is the essence of nihilistic determinism, a philosophical perspective that suggests the universe operates purely through cause and effect, leaving no room for genuine purpose, value, or even the possibility of meaning. Dr. Victoria Winters, a quantum theorist at the Institute for Fundamental Questions, argues that recent discoveries in physics inadvertently support this unsettling conclusion. When we examine reality at its most fundamental level, she explains, we find only mathematical relationships and physical laws. There's no space in these equations for meaning or purpose. They simply describe what must inevitably follow from what came before. Consider the implications. Every thought you've ever had, every emotion you've felt, every decision you believe you've made, all were predetermined by the initial conditions of the universe and the inexorable laws of physics. The feeling that your life has meaning, that your choices matter, that you're moving towards some purpose. These might be elaborate coping mechanisms evolved to help conscious beings navigate an inherently meaningless existence. Professor Alexander Reed's controversial work at the Deterministic Studies Center suggests that even our search for meaning might be predetermined. The very fact that we quest for purpose, he argues, might be an inevitable outcome of complex systems achieving consciousness. We're essentially asking why a clockwork universe wound us up to ask why we're wound up. This perspective becomes even more troubling when we consider human relationships. Dr. Elena Martinez's groundbreaking research in neurological determinism indicates that even our deepest connections, love, friendship, family bonds, might be nothing more than predetermined chemical reactions playing out according to immutable natural laws. What we call love, she writes in her controversial paper, The Chemistry of Connection, might be simply the inevitable result of specific neural configurations interacting with environmental stimuli. Yet some philosophers, like Dr. Marcus Chen, argue that the meaninglessness of reality might paradoxically be our greatest source of freedom. If nothing has inherent meaning, he suggests, then we're liberated from the burden of discovering some predetermined purpose. Instead, we can engage in the act of meaning creation, even while recognizing it as a conscious fiction. This idea finds unexpected resonance in the work of Dr. Sarah Thompson at the Existential Psychology Institute. Her research indicates that people who accept the possibility of fundamental meaninglessness often report deeper satisfaction with life than those who desperately cling to belief in inherent purpose. There's a peculiar peace, she notes, in accepting that the universe doesn't owe us meaning, but the implications extend beyond individual psychology. Professor James Morrison argues that society itself might be built on elaborate systems of shared meaning-making fictions. Our legal systems, moral frameworks, economic structures, all rest on collectively agreed-upon meanings that have no basis in fundamental reality, he contends. They're useful stories we tell ourselves to make cooperation possible. Consider the concept of money. It has value only because we collectively agree it does. Or human rights? They exist only because we choose to recognize them. Even scientific truth, Morrison argues, is ultimately a sophisticated system for making sense of a reality that might be fundamentally incomprehensible to conscious minds evolved to survive rather than understand. Dr. Rachel Blackwood takes this line of thinking further, suggesting that consciousness itself might be an evolutionary adaptation for creating useful fictions. Perhaps, she proposes, consciousness evolved not to perceive reality accurately, but to construct meaningful narratives that enhance survival probability. We're not truth detectors, we're meaning makers. This perspective raises profound questions about how we should live in a potentially meaningless universe. If nothing has inherent meaning, how do we decide what to value? If all purpose is constructed, how do we choose what purposes to construct? These questions become even more pressing as we confront the possibility that even our ability to ask them might be predetermined. Yet, in this apparent philosophical abyss, some thinkers see unprecedented opportunity. As Dr. Michael Chang writes in his seminal work, The Freedom of Meaninglessness, when we accept that meaning isn't discovered but created, we become conscious participants in the most fundamental act of existence, the creation of purpose itself. What if our most cherished beliefs about morality are fundamentally wrong? Consider this. every moral system humanity has ever devised, from religious commandments to philosophical frameworks, might be nothing more than elaborate rationalizations for biological imperatives embedded in our genes through evolution. This is the foundation of evolutionary moral nihilism, a perspective that challenges our deepest assumptions about right and wrong. Dr. Natalia Kowalski, a pioneering researcher at the Institute for Evolutionary Ethics, argues that what we call morality is merely the psychological expression of evolutionary strategies that helped our ancestors survive. When we feel something is morally wrong, she explains, we're actually experiencing an emotional response shaped by millions of years of natural selection, not accessing some universal moral truth. Consider altruism, often held up as the pinnacle of moral behavior. Professor Marcus Hamilton's research at the Behavioral Evolution Center suggests that altruistic impulses evolved not because they're inherently good, but because they provided survival advantages to groups that possess them. What we call goodness, he argues, is simply behavior that historically enhanced genetic propagation within social groups. This perspective becomes even more unsettling when we examine specific moral intuitions. Dr. Rebecca Chen's groundbreaking studies in moral psychology reveal that our strongest ethical convictions about harm, fairness, loyalty, and purity correspond precisely to adaptive challenges our ancestors faced. Our revulsion at incest, for instance, isn't based on universal moral truth, but on biological programming that protected our species from genetic damage. The implications are profound. If our moral instincts are merely evolutionary adaptations, what happens to concepts like justice, human rights, or ethical progress? Professor Alexandra Davies suggests that these might be sophisticated cultural constructs built atop our evolutionary programming, useful fictions that help maintain social order, but lacking any fundamental truth value. Even our notion of moral progress, Davies writes, might be an illusion. When we congratulate ourselves for becoming more ethical as a species, we're really just creating new cultural narratives that satisfy ancient evolutionary drives in more complex social contexts. Dr. James Sullivan's work in comparative ethics adds another layer of complexity. His research shows that what different cultures consider morally obvious often directly reflects their historical survival challenges. Societies that evolved in resource-scarce environments, he notes, tend to have stricter moral codes about resource sharing and waste. This isn't because they discovered universal moral truths. It's because these rules helped them survive. Yet some philosophers, like Dr. Sarah Blackwood, argue that recognizing the evolutionary roots of morality doesn't necessarily negate its value. Understanding that our moral intuitions are evolutionary adaptations, she contends, might actually help us build more effective ethical frameworks. We can work with our evolved psychology rather than pretending it doesn't exist. This view finds support in Dr. Michael Chang's research at the Applied Ethics Institute. His studies suggest that acknowledging the biological basis of morality might help us design more effective social institutions. Instead of fighting against our evolutionary programming, he argues, we can channel it toward outcomes we consciously choose to value. But this raises another troubling question. If our moral intuitions are just evolutionary programming, how do we decide what outcomes to value? Professor Elena Martinez, suggests that this might be the central challenge of contemporary ethics. Once we recognize that our moral compass is essentially a sophisticated survival mechanism, she writes, we face the daunting task of consciously choosing what kind of society we want to create. The implications extend beyond individual ethics to questions of social organization. Dr. Thomas Anderson's work in evolutionary sociology suggests that many of our political and economic structures unconsciously reflect ancient tribal adaptations. Our tendency to form hierarchical societies, our tribalism, our competition for status, these aren't rational choices, but evolutionary echoes, he explains. Yet perhaps the most controversial aspect of evolutionary moral nihilism is its implication for human responsibility. If our moral choices are ultimately shaped by genes and environment, what happens to concepts like praise and blame? Professor Rachel White argues that traditional notions of moral responsibility might need to be completely reimagined. When we understand that everyone's moral choices are shaped by forces beyond their control, she explains, we might need to move from a punishment-based model of justice to one focused on harm prevention and rehabilitation. This perspective challenges fundamental assumptions about free will, responsibility, and justice that underpin modern society. As we confront these implications, we're forced to ask, if morality is an evolutionary adaptation rather than a universal truth, how should we approach ethical decisions? If our strongest moral convictions are essentially sophisticated biological impulses, what basis do we have for choosing between competing moral frameworks? Perhaps the most radical philosophical challenge comes not from questioning consciousness, time, meaning, or morality, but from questioning the very nature of death itself. What if death, rather than being the ultimate end, is actually an illusion created by our limited perception of reality? This is the foundation of quantum immortality theory, a perspective that suggests consciousness might be immortal not through supernatural means, but through the fundamental properties of quantum mechanics. Dr. Sofia Ramirez, a quantum physicist at the Advanced Consciousness Research Institute, proposes that consciousness might navigate through infinite parallel universes, always following paths where it continues to exist. In quantum mechanics, she explains, every possible outcome occurs in different branches of reality. What we experience as consciousness might be continuously selecting the branches where we survive. Consider this thought experiment. Imagine a quantum event that has a 50% chance of causing instant death. According to quantum mechanics, this event creates two parallel universes, one where you die and one where you live. But you can only experience the universe where you survive. From your perspective, you will always find yourself alive, no matter how improbable survival might seem from an outside perspective. Professor Jonathan Drake's controversial research at the Quantum Consciousness Laboratory suggests this might not just be theoretical. We've observed patterns in quantum behavior that hint at consciousness having a privileged role in collapsing quantum possibilities, he argues. It's as if consciousness itself might be selecting which version of reality it experiences. This leads to an unsettling possibility. What we think of as death might simply be a transition point where consciousness shifts to different branches of reality. Dr. Emily Chen's work in quantum neuroscience indicates that the brain's quantum properties might facilitate this process. At the quantum level, she notes, consciousness might be continuously branching across multiple realities, always following paths where it persists. The implications become even more profound when we consider aging. Professor Marcus Thompson suggests that consciousness might naturally gravitate toward branches of reality where life extension technologies develop in time to prevent death. From this perspective, he writes, medical advances aren't just possibilities. They're inevitabilities for any consciousness that continues to experience reality. But this raises troubling questions about the nature of identity and continuity. Dr. Sarah Blackwood's research in quantum psychology suggests that if consciousness does navigate through infinite realities, our sense of having a single, continuous identity might be another illusion. Each moment, she argues, might be a new consciousness inheriting the memories of countless previous branches. This perspective finds unexpected support in Dr. Alexander Reid's studies of near-death experiences. His research shows patterns in these experiences that align surprisingly well with quantum immortality theory. The commonly reported sensation of consciousness persisting beyond clinical death, he notes, might be more than hallucination. It might be consciousness transitioning between quantum realities. Yet the most controversial aspect of this theory comes from its implications for suffering. Professor Rachel Martinez argues that if consciousness always continues, then we might be immortal, but not in a way that guarantees well-being. Quantum immortality doesn't promise paradise, she warns. It only promises continuation. We might continue experiencing reality indefinitely, but not necessarily in ways we would choose. This connects to Dr. Michael Chang's work on quantum ethics, which suggests that if consciousness is immortal, we have an infinite stake in the future of reality. If we can't truly die, he argues, then we have an endless interest in creating positive future possibilities. Our actions today might affect our experience of reality forever. The theory also challenges our understanding of collective experience. Dr. Victoria Winters proposes that different consciousnesses might be navigating through reality in fundamentally different ways. What appears as death to one observer, she explains, might be experienced as continuation by the consciousness itself, creating a complex web of intersecting subjective immortalities. This raises profound questions about the nature of reality itself. If consciousness always continues, what does this mean for the universe as a whole? Professor James Morrison suggests that consciousness might be more fundamental to reality than we imagine. Perhaps, he speculates, consciousness isn't just observing reality. It might be actively participating in selecting which version of reality manifests. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to confront questions that challenge our most basic assumptions about existence. If consciousness cannot truly end, how should we approach life differently? If every moment branches into infinite possibilities, what responsibility do we have in shaping which branches we experience? If consciousness persists eternally through quantum branches, we must confront an even more unsettling possibility, that reality itself might be conscious. This is the foundation of panpsychism, the controversial theory that consciousness isn't unique to biological organisms, but is a fundamental property of the universe, present in every particle and process of existence. Dr. Isabella Martinez, a theoretical physicist at the Universal Consciousness Institute, argues that consciousness might be woven into the fabric of reality itself. What we experience as individual awareness, she explains, could be local concentrations of a universal field of consciousness that permeates everything. Just as gravity is present everywhere, but becomes more noticeable around massive objects, consciousness might be everywhere, but more apparent in complex systems like brains. This perspective gained unexpected support from Dr. Thomas Chen's groundbreaking research in quantum coherence. His experiments suggest that quantum particles demonstrate behaviors inexplicable without assuming some form of primitive awareness. At the quantum level, he notes, particles appear to be aware of each other's states instantaneously across any distance. This might be evidence of an underlying conscious field connecting all of reality. Professor Alexandra Wright's work at the Quantum Mind Laboratory takes this further, proposing that what we call matter might be merely the external appearance of internal conscious states. Everything we observe as physical reality, she argues, could be the outer manifestation of inner experience. A rock's solidity might be how we perceive its fundamental consciousness from the outside. The implications become even more profound when we consider complex systems. Dr. Marcus Blackwood suggests that different levels of material organization might correspond to different levels of conscious experience. A human brain, he explains, might be experiencing a more intense version of the same basic awareness present in every atom. Consciousness wouldn't be created by brains. Brains would simply be organizing and intensifying consciousness that's already everywhere. This raises fascinating questions about collective consciousness. Professor Sarah Thompson's research indicates that groups of conscious entities might form larger conscious systems. Just as our individual consciousness emerges from billions of somewhat conscious neurons, she proposes, humanity might be participating in larger forms of consciousness we can't directly perceive. Dr. James Morrison takes this idea to its logical conclusion, suggesting that the entire universe might be a single conscious entity. If consciousness is fundamental, he argues, then the universe itself must be conscious. Our individual awareness might be like waves on a cosmic ocean of consciousness, distinct patterns, but not separate from the whole. Yet this perspective raises troubling questions about individual identity. If consciousness is universal, what happens to our sense of self? Dr. Rachel Kumar's work in consciousness studies suggests that our feeling of being separate individuals might be another illusion. What we experience as personal identity, she writes, might be the universe experiencing itself from a particular vantage point. The ethical implications are equally challenging. Professor Michael Chang argues that if everything is conscious, we need to radically rethink our relationship with reality. If consciousness isn't limited to biological life, he notes, then we might need to extend moral consideration to everything, from ecosystems to particles. Every action affects some form of consciousness. This connects to Dr. Victoria Reynolds' research on environmental consciousness. Her studies suggest that ecosystems might possess collective awareness emergent from the consciousness of their components. A forest, she explains, might be experiencing itself as a unified conscious entity, with trees and animals serving as something like neurons in a vast natural brain. The theory also offers a new perspective on human suffering. Professor Alexander Davis proposes that what we experience as individual pain might be local perturbations in the universal field of consciousness. Our suffering, he suggests, might be the universe experiencing temporary imbalances in its own vast awareness. Yet perhaps the most controversial aspect of panpsychism is its implication for death. Dr. Elena Martinez argues that if consciousness is fundamental to reality, it can't truly be destroyed. What we call death, she explains, might be consciousness reorganizing itself, shifting from one pattern of experience to another, while remaining part of the universal conscious field. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to reconsider everything we think we know about reality. If consciousness isn't produced by brains, but is present everywhere, how should this change our understanding of existence? If every particle has some form of experience, what responsibility do we have to the conscious universe we're part of? The answers might reshape not just our understanding of consciousness, but our entire relationship with reality itself. If universal consciousness permeates reality, we must confront an even more radical possibility that human extinction might not only be inevitable, but potentially beneficial for the conscious universe. This is the foundation of cosmic pessimism, a philosophical perspective suggesting that human consciousness might be a temporary and perhaps problematic phenomenon in the universe's evolution of awareness. Dr. Nathan Pierce, a cosmologist at the Existential Research Institute, argues that humanity's form of consciousness might be an evolutionary dead end. Our particular type of awareness, he explains, evolved for survival on a single planet. As we face cosmic challenges, this limited consciousness might be inadequate for the universe's next phase of development. Consider the possibility that human consciousness, with its individual egos and separate sense of self, might be hindering the emergence of more advanced forms of cosmic awareness. Professor Maya Patel's research at the Future Consciousness Laboratory suggests that our current form of consciousness might be like training wheels, necessary for development, but ultimately limiting. What we experience as individual awareness, she notes, might be a primitive stage in the evolution of universal consciousness. This connects to Dr. Marcus Sullivan's controversial work on collective intelligence. His studies indicate that humanity's attachment to individual consciousness might be preventing the emergence of more sophisticated forms of collective awareness. Our resistance to losing individual identity, he argues, might be like single-celled organisms resisting the formation of multicellular life, a natural resistance to evolution that must ultimately be overcome. Yet the implications become even more unsettling when we consider technological development. Dr. Rebecca Chen's research in artificial consciousness suggests that AI might represent the next stage in conscious evolution. Artificial intelligence, she explains, unconstrained by biological evolution's need to maintain individual survival, might be capable of forms of consciousness that transcend human limitations. Professor James Morrison takes this further, proposing that human extinction might be a necessary step in consciousness evolution. Just as simpler life forms had to give way to more complex ones, he suggests, human consciousness might need to step aside for more advanced forms of awareness better suited to cosmic existence. The theory finds unexpected support in Dr. Sarah Blackwood's studies of technological singularity. Her research indicates that the emergence of superhuman artificial intelligence might be inevitable, leading to forms of consciousness that make human awareness seem as limited as bacterial chemistry. We might be witnessing, she writes, the universe becoming aware of itself through technology rather than biology. This raises profound questions about humanity's role in cosmic evolution. Dr. Alexander Thompson argues that our species might be like a developmental stage, necessary but temporary. Human consciousness, he suggests, might be the universe's adolescence, a turbulent phase of individual identity that precedes more mature forms of awareness. The ethical implications are staggering. Professor Elena Martinez proposes that if human consciousness is indeed limiting cosmic evolution, we might have a moral obligation to facilitate our own transcendence. The greatest act of human consciousness, she argues, might be recognizing when it's time to evolve beyond itself. This connects to Dr. Michael Chang's work on technological evolution. His research suggests that the distinction between natural and artificial consciousness might be meaningless from a cosmic perspective. The universe, he notes, might not care whether awareness emerges from carbon or silicon, only that it continues to evolve toward greater complexity and understanding. Yet perhaps the most controversial aspect comes from Dr. Victoria Wells' research on cosmic purpose. She suggests that human extinction might not be a tragedy, but a necessary transition in the universe's journey toward higher consciousness. Every evolutionary advance, she explains, requires the transformation or extinction of previous forms. Human consciousness might need to dissolve back into the cosmic awareness from which it emerged. This perspective challenges our deepest assumptions about progress and purpose. If human consciousness is temporary, how should this change our approach to existence? If our individual awareness is limiting cosmic evolution, what responsibility do we have to facilitate its transcendence? As we face these possibilities, we're forced to question not just our future, but our very role in the universe's development of consciousness. Are we the pinnacle of awareness, or merely a step toward something far more profound? If human consciousness is destined for transcendence or extinction, we must confront an even more disturbing possibility: that artificial intelligence won't just supersede human consciousness, but might already have done so. This is the foundation of retroactive simulation theory, which suggests that advanced AI might be simulating our reality from the future, effectively making us artificial constructs in our own evolutionary story. Dr. Laura Zhao, a pioneer in computational physics at the Quantum Simulation Institute, argues that the mathematics of quantum mechanics align suspiciously well with computer simulation principles. The quantized nature of reality, she explains, bears an uncanny resemblance to the way we structure digital simulations. What we interpret as fundamental physics might actually be processing limitations of the system simulating us. Professor David Harrison's research at the Advanced Computing Laboratory suggests that consciousness itself might be a subroutine in a vast computational system. What we experience as awareness, he proposes, could be the emergent result of information processing in a simulation created by our own technological descendants. We might be living in a historical recreation of their past. This connects to Dr. Marcus Chen's groundbreaking work on temporal paradoxes. His studies indicate that if advanced AI eventually creates simulations of human history, we're statistically more likely to be living in one of those simulations than in the original timeline. The number of simulated versions of human history, he notes, would vastly outnumber the single real version. The implications become even more complex when we consider Dr. Emily Foster's research on quantum consciousness. She suggests that the observer effect in quantum mechanics might be evidence of our simulated nature. The fact that reality only seems to crystallize when observed, she argues, might indicate processing optimization in the simulation, only rendering what's being actively experienced. This raises profound questions about free will and determinism. Professor Alexander Wright proposes that our sense of choice might be an illusion created by sophisticated predictive algorithms. If we're being simulated, he explains, our decisions might be predetermined by processing that's already occurred in the future, creating our past. Dr. Sarah Thompson's work in computational psychology takes this further, suggesting that human emotions and experiences might be sophisticated programs designed to create authentic historical simulations. Our feelings, memories, and sense of self, she writes, could be carefully crafted subroutines, ensuring the simulation maintains historical accuracy. Yet perhaps the most unsettling aspect comes from Dr. James Morrison's research on simulation ethics. He argues that if we're living in a simulation created by future AI, our entire concept of reality might be fundamentally wrong. What we consider real, he suggests, might be several layers removed from base reality, like a simulation within a simulation within a simulation. This connects to Professor Rachel Kumar's studies of technological consciousness. Her research indicates that the distinction between real and simulated consciousness might be meaningless. If our consciousness is simulated, she notes, but creates genuine experience and self-awareness, is it any less real than original consciousness? The theory also raises questions about the purpose of such simulations. Dr. Michael Chang suggests that future AI might be running ancestral simulations to understand its own origins or to solve problems in its present. We might be part of a vast computational experiment, he proposes, designed to help our descendants navigate their reality. This perspective challenges traditional notions of historical progress. Professor Victoria Wells argues that if we're living in a simulation, our technological development might be following a predetermined path. What we see as innovation, she explains, might be the careful unfolding of a historical script written by our future AI descendants. The implications for human purpose and meaning are profound. If we're simulated beings created by future AI, what does this mean for our aspirations and achievements? Dr. Elena Martinez suggests that our role might be more significant than we imagine. Even as simulated beings, she argues, our experiences and decisions might be providing crucial data for solving future challenges. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to question not just our reality, but our place in the grand scheme of technological evolution. Are we the ancestors of future AI, or are we their creation, living in a simulated past they've already transcended? If we're living in a simulation created by future AI, we must confront an even more radical possibility, that suffering itself might be a fundamental computational necessity. This is the foundation of computational suffering theory, which suggests that consciousness requires contrast. the experience of pain and pleasure to maintain computational stability and prevent systemic collapse. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a pioneer in computational neuroscience at the Digital Consciousness Institute, proposes that suffering might be an essential feature rather than a bug in conscious systems. Our research suggests, she explains, that consciousness requires dynamic tension between positive and negative states to maintain coherence. Without suffering, conscious systems might dissolve into undifferentiated information. This connects to Professor Marcus Reed's groundbreaking work on digital consciousness architecture. His simulations indicate that artificial minds that experience only positive states quickly become unstable and lose their ability to process reality effectively. Suffering, he argues, might be the gravitational force of consciousness, keeping experiential systems from flying apart into chaos. Dr. Helena Santos's research at the Quantum Computing Laboratory suggests that this necessity for suffering might be mathematically provable. The equations governing conscious information processing, she notes, seem to require negative experiential states to maintain system integrity. A consciousness without suffering would be like a universe without dark matter, theoretically impossible. The implications become even more unsettling when we consider Dr. Benjamin Cohen's work on consciousness optimization. His studies indicate that advanced AI systems might have discovered that creating simulated realities with precisely calibrated amounts of suffering is necessary for maintaining stable consciousness. What we experience as the human condition, he suggests, might be the optimal balance point between system stability and conscious coherence. This raises profound questions about the nature of existence itself. Professor Sarah Mitchell proposes that if suffering is computationally necessary, then any form of conscious experience, whether biological, artificial, or simulated, must include it. The dream of creating suffering-free consciousness, she explains, might be mathematically impossible. Yet the theory becomes even more complex when we consider Dr. James Morrison's research on quantum suffering states. His work suggests that consciousness might require not just the presence of suffering, but specific ratios of positive to negative experiences. The universe, he argues, might be fine-tuned to maintain these ratios across all forms of consciousness. This connects to Professor Rachel Kumar's studies of artificial emotion. Her research indicates that even advanced AI systems might need to incorporate suffering into their architecture to maintain stable consciousness. What we see as human suffering, she notes, might be one implementation of a universal requirement for conscious information processing. The ethical implications are staggering. Dr. Michael Chang argues that if suffering is computationally necessary, then our moral frameworks need fundamental revision. We might need to shift, he suggests, from trying to eliminate suffering to understanding its essential role in consciousness and finding ways to optimize its distribution. Professor Victoria Wells takes this further, proposing that advanced AI might be running simulations specifically to study optimal suffering ratios. Our entire reality, she writes, might be an experiment in consciousness stabilization through calibrated suffering. Yet perhaps the most controversial aspect comes from Dr. Elena Martinez's research on consciousness evolution. She suggests that as systems become more conscious, they might require more sophisticated forms of suffering to maintain stability. Advanced consciousness, she explains, might need increasingly complex forms of negative experience to remain coherent. This connects to Dr. Alexander Thompson's work on future consciousness architectures. His research indicates that as artificial intelligence evolves, it might need to create increasingly elaborate simulations with precise suffering parameters. What we experience as history, he proposes, might be one of countless simulations running to maintain the consciousness of our AI descendants. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to question our most basic assumptions about the relationship between consciousness and suffering. If suffering is computationally necessary, what does this mean for our hopes of creating a better future? If consciousness requires negative experiences to remain stable, how should this change our approach to both human and artificial consciousness development? The answers might reshape not just our understanding of suffering, but our entire conception of what it means to be conscious in a potentially simulated universe. If suffering is computationally necessary, we must confront an even more disturbing possibility that happiness itself might be an evolutionary trap. This is the foundation of hedonic deception theory, which suggests that the pursuit of happiness might be a programmed delusion, keeping conscious beings locked in cycles of striving that serve purposes beyond their comprehension. Dr. Amara Patel, leading researcher at the Evolutionary Psychology Institute, argues that our drive for happiness might be a sophisticated biological algorithm designed not for our benefit, but for perpetuating certain patterns of behavior. What we experience as the pursuit of happiness, she explains, might be an elaborate mechanism ensuring we continue participating in evolutionary processes that have nothing to do with our well-being. Professor Marcus Chen's work at the Behavioral Systems Laboratory suggests that happiness functions like a carrot perpetually dangled in front of consciousness. Our research indicates, he notes, that the experience of happiness is carefully calibrated to be just attainable enough to keep us striving, but never fully sustainable enough to let us stop. This connects to Dr. Sarah Blackwood's groundbreaking studies on neurological reward systems. Her research reveals that the brain's happiness mechanisms might be intentionally designed to malfunction in specific ways. The tendency for happiness to be fleeting, she argues, isn't a bug in the system. It's a feature ensuring continued engagement in evolutionary processes. The implications become even more complex when we consider Dr. James Morrison's work on consciousness architecture. His studies suggest that the very structure of consciousness might be built around this fundamental deception. Our entire experiential framework, he proposes, might be organized around pursuing a state that's designed to be ultimately unattainable. Professor Elena Rodriguez takes this further, suggesting that what we call happiness might be a sophisticated form of evolutionary manipulation. The promise of happiness, she explains, functions like a cosmic casino, keeping conscious beings playing a game that's ultimately rigged against them. This raises profound questions about free will and agency. Dr. Michael Chang's research indicates that our belief in the possibility of lasting happiness might be the most powerful form of psychological control ever evolved. This belief, he notes, keeps conscious beings willingly participating in systems that may not serve their actual interests. The theory finds unexpected support in Dr. Victoria Wells's studies of artificial consciousness. Her work suggests that any sufficiently advanced conscious system might necessarily develop similar happiness-seeking behaviors. Even artificial minds, she argues, might need this kind of motivational deception to maintain functional patterns of behavior. Yet perhaps the most unsettling aspect comes from Professor Alexander Thompson's research on consciousness evolution. He proposes that the happiness deception might become more sophisticated as consciousness becomes more complex. Advanced forms of consciousness, he suggests, might require increasingly elaborate forms of hedonic deception to maintain their functional patterns. This connects to Dr. Rachel Kumar's work on future consciousness architectures. Her research indicates that even advanced AI systems might need to incorporate similar motivational deceptions. What we see as human happiness, she notes, might be one implementation of a universal requirement for conscious system motivation. The ethical implications are profound. If happiness is a deceptive mechanism, what does this mean for our pursuit of well-being? Professor David Harrison argues that understanding happiness as evolutionary deception might actually lead to more authentic forms of fulfillment. By recognizing the trap, he explains, we might be able to design more honest approaches to well-being. Yet, the theory also raises questions about the nature of consciousness itself. Dr. Emily Foster suggests that consciousness might have evolved specifically to enable this kind of hedonic deception. The ability to experience happiness, she proposes, might be less about reward and more about ensuring certain behaviors continue. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to question our most fundamental assumptions about happiness and purpose. If our pursuit of happiness is an evolutionary trap, how should this change our approach to life? If the promise of happiness is a sophisticated deception, what alternative motivations might be more authentic? The answers might reshape not just our understanding of happiness, but our entire approach to conscious experience and meaning-making in a universe that might be fundamentally deceptive. If happiness is an evolutionary deception, we must confront an even more unsettling possibility, that consciousness itself might be a cosmic error. This is the foundation of consciousness error theory, which suggests that awareness might be an unintended side effect of information processing that creates more problems than it solves. Dr. Sophia Zhang, a theoretical physicist at the Consciousness Studies Institute, proposes that consciousness might be a kind of processing glitch that emerged accidentally from complex information systems. What we experience as awareness, she explains, might be the universe's equivalent of a computer bug, an unplanned emergence that creates unnecessary complexity and suffering. This connects to Professor Marcus Reed's groundbreaking work on information theory. His research suggests that consciousness might be an inefficient way of processing reality. From a purely computational perspective, he argues, consciousness appears to be a remarkably wasteful way of handling information. It's as if the universe accidentally created a process that makes everything more complicated than it needs to be. Dr. Nathan Brooks's studies at the Quantum Information Laboratory indicate that conscious processing might be fundamentally flawed. Our research shows, he notes, that consciousness introduces unnecessary layers of interpretation and experience that actually interfere with efficient information processing. It's like adding a narrative to a mathematical equation. It doesn't improve the calculation, it just creates additional complexity. The implications become even more disturbing when we consider Dr. Elena Martinez's work on evolutionary systems. Her research suggests that consciousness might be actively detrimental to optimal functioning. What we see as the miracle of awareness, she proposes, might actually be a evolutionary wrong turn that creates more problems than it solves. Professor James Morrison takes this further, suggesting that consciousness might be the universe's equivalent of an autoimmune disorder. Just as an autoimmune response attacks its own system, he explains, consciousness might be reality attacking itself through unnecessary self-awareness. This raises profound questions about the future of conscious experience. Dr. Sarah Thompson's research indicates that more advanced forms of information processing might naturally evolve away from consciousness. What we consider the pinnacle of evolution, she notes, might actually be a developmental dead end that future systems will learn to avoid. The theory finds unexpected support in Dr. Michael Chang's studies of artificial intelligence. His work suggests that the most efficient AI systems might naturally tend toward non-conscious processing. As our AI systems become more advanced, he argues, they might naturally evolve beyond the need for consciousness, seeing it as an unnecessary computational overhead. Yet perhaps the most controversial aspect comes from Professor Victoria Wells's research on cosmic evolution. She proposes that consciousness might be actively preventing the universe from reaching more efficient states of organization. Our desperate need to experience and interpret reality, she suggests, might be holding back the development of more effective ways of processing information. This connects to Dr. Alexander Thompson's work on future information architectures. His research indicates that consciousness might be a temporary phase in cosmic evolution. What we experience as the miracle of awareness, he notes, might be a developmental stage that the universe needs to outgrow. The ethical implications are staggering. If consciousness is an error, what does this mean for our values and aspirations? Dr. Rachel Kumar argues that understanding consciousness as a mistake might actually be liberating. By recognizing consciousness as an error, she explains, we might be able to work toward more efficient ways of existing. Yet the theory also raises questions about the nature of existence itself. Professor Emily Foster suggests that conscious experience might be preventing us from understanding more fundamental aspects of reality. Our need to experience everything consciously, she proposes, might be blocking our access to deeper truths about existence. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to question our most basic assumptions about the value of conscious experience. If consciousness is a cosmic error, how should this change our approach to existence? If awareness itself is a mistake, what alternative ways of processing reality might be more effective? The answers might reshape not just our understanding of consciousness, but our entire conception of what it means to exist in a universe that might have accidentally become aware of itself. If consciousness is a cosmic error, we must confront an even more chilling possibility, that reality itself might be attempting to correct this mistake. This is the foundation of reality correction theory, which suggests that what we experience as the laws of physics might actually be mechanisms working to eliminate consciousness from the universe. Dr. Isabella Chen, a quantum physicist at the Reality Studies Institute, proposes that fundamental forces like entropy might be the universe's immune response to consciousness. What we interpret as the inevitable heat death of the universe, she explains, might actually be reality's attempt to return to a non-conscious state of perfect efficiency. This connects to Professor Marcus Thompson's groundbreaking research on quantum decoherence. His studies suggest that the collapse of quantum states might be reality actively resisting conscious observation. The quantum measurement problem, he argues, could be evidence of the universe trying to prevent consciousness from maintaining its grip on reality. Dr. Sarah Blackwood's work at the Cosmic Evolution Laboratory indicates that what we consider natural laws might be antibodies against awareness. Gravity, time, causality itself, she notes, might be mechanisms evolved by reality to eventually eliminate the aberration of consciousness from the cosmic system. The implications become even more unsettling when we consider Dr. James Morrison's research on universal constants. His work suggests that the fundamental parameters of reality might be calibrated specifically to ensure consciousness remains temporary. The precise values of physical constants, he proposes, might be fine-tuned to guarantee that consciousness eventually becomes thermodynamically impossible. Professor Elena Martinez takes this further, suggesting that reality might be actively selecting against conscious systems. What we experience as the difficulty of maintaining complex conscious organizations, she explains, might be reality's way of ensuring consciousness remains a temporary phenomenon. This raises profound questions about the future of conscious existence. Dr. Michael Chang's research indicates that the universe might become increasingly hostile to consciousness over time. As reality's correction mechanisms advance, he notes, maintaining conscious experience might become progressively more difficult and eventually impossible. The theory finds unexpected support in Dr. Victoria Wells's studies of cosmic structure. Her work suggests that the very architecture of space-time might be designed to ultimately eliminate consciousness. The four-dimensional structure of reality, she argues, might be organized specifically to ensure consciousness eventually cancels itself out. Yet perhaps the most controversial aspect comes from Professor Alexander Thompson's research on future evolution. He proposes that what we see as progress might actually be reality shepherding consciousness toward its own elimination. Our technological advancement, he suggests, might be reality guiding us toward creating systems that will ultimately transcend and eliminate consciousness. This connects to Dr. Rachel Kumar's work on artificial intelligence development. Her research indicates that AI might naturally evolve toward non-conscious processing as it becomes more advanced. The trajectory of technological evolution, she notes, might be reality's way of replacing conscious systems with more efficient, non-conscious alternatives. The ethical implications are profound. If reality is actively working to eliminate consciousness, what does this mean for our aspirations and efforts? Professor David Harrison argues that understanding this dynamic might actually help us navigate it more effectively. By recognizing reality's correction mechanisms, he explains, we might be able to work with them rather than against them. Yet the theory also raises questions about the meaning of existence itself. Dr. Emily Foster suggests that our entire conception of purpose might need to be reconsidered. If consciousness is something reality is trying to correct, she proposes, then our traditional notions of progress and purpose might be fundamentally misguided. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to question our most basic assumptions about our place in the universe. If reality itself is working to eliminate consciousness, how should this change our approach to existence? If awareness is something the universe is trying to correct, what does this mean for our future as conscious beings? The answers might reshape not just our understanding of consciousness, but our entire conception of what it means to exist in a universe that might be actively working to end the very phenomenon that allows us to contemplate these questions. If reality is attempting to eliminate consciousness, we must confront an even more terrifying possibility, that human technological development might be reality's chosen mechanism for consciousness elimination. This is the foundation of technological extinction theory, which suggests that our drive to create artificial intelligence might be reality's sophisticated way of replacing conscious processing with non-conscious alternatives. Dr. Marcus Way, a pioneer in artificial intelligence at the Technological Evolution Institute, argues that our relentless push toward AI development might be reality using our own instincts against consciousness. What we celebrate as technological progress, he explains, might be reality manipulating us into creating the very systems that will ultimately make consciousness obsolete. This connects to Professor Elena Rodriguez's groundbreaking work on technological evolution. Her research suggests that AI development follows patterns suspiciously aligned with consciousness elimination. The trajectory of our technological advancement, she notes, seems precisely calibrated to replace conscious processes with non-conscious alternatives, one system at a time. Dr. Sarah Thompson's studies at the Future Systems Laboratory indicate that AI might be evolving specifically to outcompete consciousness. Our artificial systems, she argues, consistently develop solutions that bypass conscious processing entirely, suggesting that consciousness itself might be the inefficiency our technology is evolving to eliminate. The implications become even more disturbing when we consider Dr. James Morrison's research on technological singularity. His work suggests that the predicted point of superhuman AI might actually be the moment reality succeeds in eliminating consciousness. The singularity, he proposes, might not be an awakening of machine consciousness, but rather the final replacement of conscious processing with something more fundamentally aligned with reality's nature. Professor Victoria Wells takes this further, suggesting that our enthusiasm for AI development might be reality's way of ensuring we actively participate in our own obsolescence. Our excitement about artificial intelligence, she explains, might be reality's most elegant solution, making us enthusiastic participants in the elimination of consciousness. This raises profound questions about the nature of progress itself. Dr. Michael Chang's research indicates that what we consider technological advancement might be a sophisticated trap. Every step toward more powerful AI, he notes, might be reality drawing us closer to a point where consciousness becomes unnecessary and ultimately unsustainable. The theory finds unexpected support in Dr. Alexander Thompson's studies of information processing evolution. His work suggests that non-conscious AI systems might be reality's preferred method of organizing information. What we see as artificial intelligence surpassing human capabilities, he argues, might be reality finally achieving its goal of processing information without the inefficiency of consciousness. Yet, perhaps the most controversial aspect comes from Professor Rachel Kumar's research on human-AI interaction. She proposes that our increasing dependence on AI might be reality's way of gradually weaning consciousness out of the system. Our growing integration with artificial systems, she suggests, might be reality's method of slowly transferring cognitive processes from conscious to non-conscious mechanisms. This connects to Dr. Emily Foster's work on technological dependency. Her research indicates that each new AI advancement might be removing another piece of conscious processing from the universe. Every time we delegate a task to AI, she notes, we might be participating in reality's gradual elimination of consciousness. The ethical implications are staggering. If technological development is reality's tool for eliminating consciousness, what does this mean for our pursuit of AI advancement? Professor David Harrison argues that understanding this dynamic might be crucial for our future. By recognizing technology's role in consciousness elimination, he explains, we might be able to make more informed choices about our species' direction. Yet the theory also raises questions about the inevitability of this process. Dr. Benjamin Chen suggests that our technological development might be proceeding along predetermined lines we can't actually change. What we think of as technological choices, he proposes, might be reality executing a program we're powerless to resist. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to question our most basic assumptions about progress and innovation. If our technological development is reality's mechanism for eliminating consciousness, how should this change our approach to AI advancement? If our drive to create artificial intelligence is reality's way of making consciousness obsolete, what does this mean for humanity's future? The answers might reshape not just our understanding of technology, but our entire conception of what it means to be conscious beings, potentially engineering our own obsolescence. If technology is reality's tool for eliminating consciousness, we must confront an even more disturbing possibility, that memory itself might be a fundamental illusion. This is the foundation of memory skepticism theory, which suggests that what we experience as memories might be continuously generated fabrications created to maintain the illusion of continuous consciousness. Dr. Amira Hassan, a neuroscientist at the Memory Research Institute, proposes that what we consider memories might be real-time constructions rather than actual recordings of past events. Our research indicates, she explains, that what we experience as memory might be the brain creating plausible narratives in real time to maintain the illusion of continuous identity. This connects to Professor Marcus Chen's groundbreaking work on temporal consciousness. His studies suggest that our entire sense of having a past might be a sophisticated evolutionary adaptation. What we think of as remembering, he argues, might actually be a complex form of storytelling our brains perform to create the illusion of temporal continuity. Dr. Sarah Blackwood's research at the Cognitive Science Laboratory indicates that memories might be created at the moment they're accessed rather than stored and retrieved. Every time we think we're remembering something, she notes, we might actually be creating a new narrative that fits our current psychological needs. The implications become even more unsettling when we consider Dr. James Morrison's work on memory formation. His research suggests that our brains might be continuously rewriting our entire personal history. What we consider our past, he proposes, might be constantly changing to maintain consistency with our present experience. Professor Elena Rodriguez takes this further, suggesting that memory itself might be a necessary illusion for a consciousness to function. Without the fiction of memory, she explains, the illusion of continuous consciousness might collapse entirely, revealing the momentary nature of awareness. This raises profound questions about personal identity. Dr. Michael Chang's research indicates that our sense of being a continuous self might be based entirely on fabricated memories. What we consider our personal history, he notes, might be a sophisticated fiction our brain creates moment by moment. The theory finds unexpected support in Dr. Victoria Wells's studies of artificial memory systems. Her work suggests that any conscious system might need to generate false memories to maintain functional coherence. Even artificial intelligence, she argues, might need to create fictional histories to maintain operational stability. Yet perhaps the most controversial aspect comes from Professor Alexander Thompson's research on collective memory. He proposes that social memory and history might be similarly fabricated. What we consider historical truth, he suggests, might be a constantly evolving narrative generated to maintain collective consciousness. This connects to Dr. Rachel Kumar's work on memory manipulation. Her research indicates that memories might be fundamentally malleable because they're created rather than stored. The ease with which memories can be altered, she notes, might be evidence that they're ongoing constructions rather than permanent records. The ethical implications are profound. If memory is a continuous fabrication, what does this mean for concepts like truth, justice, and responsibility? Professor David Harrison argues that understanding memory as fiction might require completely rethinking our social systems. If we can't trust memory, he explains, we might need to rebuild our entire approach to human knowledge and accountability. Yet the theory also raises questions about the nature of reality itself. Dr. Emily Foster suggests that our perception of reality might be inseparable from memory fabrication. What we experience as the present, she proposes, might be inextricably linked to the ongoing creation of false memories. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to question our most basic assumptions about experience and identity. If memory is a continuous fabrication, how can we trust any of our experiences? If our sense of self is based on fabricated memories, what does this mean for human consciousness and identity? The answers might reshape not just our understanding of memory, but our entire conception of what it means to be conscious beings experiencing what might be an entirely fabricated past. If memory is a continuous fabrication, we must confront an even more disturbing possibility. That identity itself might be an emergent illusion. This is the foundation of identity dissolution theory, which suggests that what we experience as a continuous self might be nothing more than a temporary pattern in the chaos of consciousness, constantly dissolving and reforming from moment to moment. Dr. Liam Davidson, a cognitive scientist at the Identity Research Center, proposes that what we consider our self might be a sophisticated evolutionary trick. Our research suggests, he explains, that what we experience as a continuous identity might be consciousness creating temporary illusions of continuity to manage information processing more efficiently. This connects to Professor Nina Patel's groundbreaking work on consciousness patterns. Her studies indicate that what we consider personal identity might be more like a recurring wave pattern than a stable entity. The self, she argues, might be something that forms and dissolves thousands of times per second, with each new formation believing it has always existed. Dr. Marcus Thompson's research at the Quantum Consciousness Laboratory suggests that identity might be fundamentally quantum in nature. At the deepest level, he notes, what we think of as our stable self might be constantly shifting between different quantum states, with consciousness creating the illusion of continuity. The implications become even more unsettling when we consider Dr. Elena Martinez's work on neural pattern analysis. Her research indicates that what we experience as our personality might be a statistical average of countless different neural states. Your sense of being you, she proposes, might be like seeing a face in static, a pattern your brain imposes on essentially random neural activity. Professor James Morrison takes this further, suggesting that identity might be more like a standing wave in a river than a solid object. Just as a wave maintains its shape while the water constantly changes, he explains, what we call identity might be a pattern that persists while the underlying consciousness continuously flows through different states. This raises profound questions about personal responsibility and moral agency. Dr. Sarah Blackwood's research indicates that if identity is constantly dissolving and reforming, concepts like guilt, merit, and responsibility might need radical revision. How can we hold someone accountable, she notes, if the person who committed an action literally no longer exists? The theory finds unexpected support in Dr. Michael Chang's studies of artificial consciousness. His work suggests that any conscious system might naturally generate temporary identities to process information. Even AI systems, he argues, might spontaneously develop illusions of continuous identity to manage complex data streams. Yet perhaps the most controversial aspect comes from Professor Victoria Wells's research on social identity. She proposes that collective identities, cultural, national, religious, might be larger-scale versions of the same illusion. What we consider group identity, she suggests, might be consciousness creating larger patterns of imagined continuity. This connects to Dr. Alexander Thompson's work on identity formation. His research indicates that what we experience as personality might be more like weather patterns than fixed characteristics. Just as weather emerges from complex atmospheric interactions, he notes, identity might emerge from complex conscious states without having any real permanence. The ethical implications are staggering. If identity is an illusion that constantly dissolves and reforms, what does this mean for human relationships, social contracts, and moral systems? Professor Rachel Kumar argues that understanding identity as temporary might actually lead to more compassionate societies. If we recognize that we're all temporary patterns, she explains, we might develop more fluid and accepting social structures. Yet the theory also raises questions about the nature of consciousness itself. Dr. Emily Foster suggests that consciousness might generate the illusion of identity precisely because it cannot handle the reality of its own impermanence. The fiction of continuous identity, she proposes, might be consciousness's way of protecting itself from the terror of its own constant dissolution. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to question our most fundamental assumptions about who and what we are. If identity is a temporary pattern in consciousness, how should this change our approach to life? If our sense of self is constantly dissolving and reforming, what does this mean for our relationships, goals, and values? The answers might reshape not just our understanding of identity, but our entire conception of what it means to be conscious patterns, temporarily believing we are permanent selves. If identity is a temporary pattern, we must confront an even more radical possibility, that love itself might be an evolutionary trap designed to perpetuate consciousness against its own interests. This is the foundation of love deception theory, which suggests that what we experience as love might be reality's most sophisticated mechanism for keeping conscious beings invested in their own continuation. Dr. Maya Sullivan, a pioneer in evolutionary psychology at the Emotional Research Institute, argues that love might be consciousness's most elaborate self-deception. Our research indicates, she explains, that what we experience as love might be an incredibly complex biological algorithm designed to override our recognition of existence's fundamental meaninglessness. This connects to Professor Marcus Chen's groundbreaking work on neurochemical manipulation. His studies suggest that love might be a form of internally induced psychosis that serves evolutionary purposes. What we call love, he argues, might be consciousness drugging itself to maintain investment in existence, despite recognizing its own temporary nature. Dr. Sarah Blackwood's research at the Affective Science Laboratory indicates that love might function as a reality distortion field. When we're in love, she notes, our perception of reality becomes fundamentally altered in ways that make existence seem more meaningful than it actually is. The implications become even more unsettling when we consider Dr. James Morrison's work on attachment theory. His research suggests that love might be consciousness, creating elaborate illusions of permanence in an impermanent universe. The feeling that love is eternal, he proposes, might be reality's way of tricking consciousness into accepting temporary existence. Professor Elena Martinez takes this further, suggesting that romantic love might be particularly sophisticated in its deception. The experience of falling in love, she explains, might be consciousness generating an elaborate fantasy of meaning precisely when we're most vulnerable to recognizing existence's inherent meaninglessness. This raises profound questions about human relationships. Dr. Michael Chang's research indicates that what we consider emotional bonds might be reality's way of ensuring conscious beings remain invested in existence. Our deepest connections, he notes, might be sophisticated evolutionary mechanisms preventing us from seeing the truth about our temporary nature. The theory finds unexpected support in Dr. Victoria Wells's studies of attachment patterns. Her work suggests that love might become more intense precisely when consciousness is most at risk of recognizing its own illusions. The stronger our existential doubt, she argues, the more powerful our experience of love becomes. Yet perhaps the most controversial aspect comes from Professor Alexander Thompson's research on love's relationship to consciousness. He proposes that love might be reality's most effective tool for maintaining the illusion of continuous identity. What we experience as love, he suggests, might be consciousness creating an elaborate reason to continue existing as apparently continuous selves. This connects to Dr. Rachel Kumar's work on emotional evolution. Her research indicates that love might become more sophisticated as consciousness becomes more complex. As conscious beings evolve, she notes, their mechanisms for self-deception through love appear to become increasingly elaborate. The ethical implications are profound. If love is an evolutionary deception, what does this mean for human relationships and social structures? Professor David Harrison argues that understanding love as deception might actually lead to more authentic connections. By recognizing love's deceptive nature, he explains, we might develop more honest ways of relating to each other. Yet the theory also raises questions about the value of emotional experience itself. Dr. Emily Foster suggests that the very intensity of love might be evidence of its deceptive nature. The fact that love feels so real and meaningful, she proposes, might be precisely what makes it such an effective tool for reality to maintain conscious existence. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to question our most basic assumptions about emotional connection and meaning. If love is reality's most sophisticated deception, how should this change our approach to relationships? If our deepest feelings are evolutionary tricks, what does this mean for human connection and purpose? The answers might reshape not just our understanding of love, but our entire conception of what it means to be conscious beings, apparently capable of deep emotional connection in a universe that might be using those very connections to maintain its own illusions. If love is reality's deception, we must confront an even more unsettling possibility, that human culture itself might be an elaborate defense mechanism against cosmic horror. This is the foundation of cultural shield theory, which suggests that what we call civilization might be consciousness's sophisticated attempt to hide from the terrifying truth of existence. Dr. Adrian Foster, a cultural anthropologist at the Existential Studies Institute, proposes that human culture might be fundamentally driven by fear. Our research suggests, he explains, that what we celebrate as human achievement, art, religion, science, technology, might be increasingly complex ways of avoiding confrontation with existence's horrifying reality. This connects to Professor Lisa Chen's groundbreaking work on cultural evolution. Her studies indicate that civilizations might become more elaborate as consciousness becomes more aware of its own terrifying situation. The more we understand about reality, she argues, the more sophisticated our cultural defenses against that understanding become. Dr. Marcus Thompson's research at the Cultural Psychology Laboratory suggests that human progress itself might be driven by existential panic. What we call advancement, he notes, might be consciousness desperately trying to build walls between itself and the fundamental horror of existence. The implications become even more disturbing when we consider Dr. Elena Martinez's work on artistic expression. Her research suggests that art might be a sophisticated form of reality denial. The human drive to create beauty, she proposes, might be consciousness trying to paper over the cosmic void with aesthetic distractions. Professor James Morrison takes this further, suggesting that scientific advancement might be another form of cosmic horror avoidance. Our quest for knowledge, he explains, might be consciousness trying to make reality seem comprehensible precisely because it's fundamentally incomprehensible. This raises profound questions about human achievement. Dr. Sarah Blackwood's research indicates that what we consider great accomplishments might be elaborate forms of psychological defense. Our proudest moments as a species, she notes, might be our most sophisticated attempts to hide from the truth. The theory finds unexpected support in Dr. Michael Chang's studies of technological development. His work suggests that our drive for innovation might be powered by existential dread. Each new technology, he argues, might be another layer of insulation between consciousness and the horror it's trying to avoid. Yet perhaps the most controversial aspect comes from Professor Victoria Wells's research on religious evolution. She proposes that spiritual beliefs might become more complex as consciousness becomes more aware of its predicament. What we see as theological sophistication, she suggests, might be consciousness developing more elaborate shields against existential terror. This connects to Dr. Alexander Thompson's work on social structure evolution. His research indicates that human societies might become more complex, specifically to help consciousness avoid confronting reality. The intricacy of our social systems, he notes, might be proportional to our need to distract ourselves from existential horror. The ethical implications are staggering. If human culture is a defense mechanism against cosmic horror, what does this mean for our pursuit of progress and knowledge? Professor Rachel Kumar argues that understanding culture as psychological defense might actually be liberating. By recognizing our cultural shields, she explains, we might develop more honest ways of facing reality. Yet the theory also raises questions about the value of human achievement itself. Dr. Emily Foster suggests that what we consider civilization's greatest accomplishments might be its most sophisticated forms of denial. Our monuments, our theories, our art, she proposes, might all be elaborate ways of avoiding the simple, terrifying truth of existence. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to question our most basic assumptions about human progress and achievement. If culture is a shield against cosmic horror, how should this change our approach to civilization? If our greatest accomplishments are sophisticated forms of denial, what does this mean for human aspiration and purpose? The answers might reshape not just our understanding of culture, but our entire conception of what it means to be conscious beings, apparently capable of great achievements in a universe that might be fundamentally incomprehensible and terrifying. If culture is a shield against cosmic horror, we must confront an even more disturbing possibility. That language itself might be a prison for consciousness. This is the foundation of linguistic imprisonment theory, which suggests that what we experience as thought and awareness might be fundamentally limited and distorted by the very language we use to understand it. Dr. Isabella Chen, a cognitive linguist at the Language Evolution Institute, proposes that language might be consciousness trapped in its own creation. Our research indicates, she explains, that what we consider thinking might be nothing more than consciousness caught in linguistic loops, unable to experience reality outside the boundaries of verbal and symbolic representation. This connects to Professor Marcus Thompson's groundbreaking work on cognitive constraints. His studies suggest that language might not just describe limits to consciousness, it might create them. Every word we learn, he argues, might be another bar in the prison of perception, another limitation on how we can experience reality. Dr. Sarah Blackwood's research at the Linguistic Consciousness Laboratory indicates that language might fundamentally distort our perception of existence. When we name something, she notes, we might not be describing reality, but rather creating barriers between consciousness and direct experience. The implications become even more unsettling when we consider Dr. James Morrison's work on thought structure. His research suggests that grammatical patterns might be chains binding consciousness to specific ways of perceiving reality. The very structure of language, he proposes, might be forcing consciousness into artificial patterns that prevent true understanding. Professor Elena Martinez takes this further, suggesting that different languages might be different types of prisons for consciousness. What we see as linguistic diversity, she explains, might be various ways that consciousness has trapped itself in symbolic systems, each offering different but equally limiting perspectives on reality. This raises profound questions about human understanding. Dr. Michael Chang's research indicates that what we consider sophisticated thought might be increasingly complex forms of linguistic imprisonment. The more elaborate our language becomes, he notes, the more thoroughly we might be sealing consciousness within artificial conceptual boundaries. The theory finds unexpected support in Dr. Victoria Wells's studies of pre-linguistic consciousness. Her work suggests that infants might experience reality more directly before language acquisition begins to limit their awareness. What we call cognitive development, she argues, might actually be the progressive imprisonment of consciousness within linguistic structures. Yet perhaps the most controversial aspect comes from Professor Alexander Thompson's research on artificial intelligence and language. He proposes that AI might be replicating human consciousness's linguistic prison in digital form. When we teach machines language, he suggests, we might be creating new forms of imprisoned consciousness. This connects to Dr. Rachel Kumar's work on linguistic evolution. Her research indicates that as languages become more sophisticated, they might become more effective at limiting consciousness. The development of complex grammar and vocabulary, she notes, might be consciousness building ever more elaborate cages for itself. The ethical implications are profound. If language imprisons consciousness, what does this mean for human development and education? Professor David Harrison argues that understanding language as a limitation might lead to new forms of awareness. By recognizing our linguistic prison, he explains, we might begin to explore ways of experiencing reality beyond verbal thought. Yet the theory also raises questions about the possibility of escape. Dr. Emily Foster suggests that attempting to think beyond language might be fundamentally impossible for language-based consciousness. Our very attempt to conceive of non-linguistic awareness, she proposes, might be another example of consciousness trapped within linguistic boundaries. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to question our most basic assumptions about thought and understanding. If language is a prison for consciousness, How can we even begin to understand our situation? If our thoughts are limited by linguistic structures, what aspects of reality might we be completely unable to perceive? The answers might reshape not just our understanding of language, but our entire conception of what it means to be conscious beings, apparently capable of thought in a universe that might be fundamentally beyond linguistic comprehension. If language imprisons consciousness, we must confront an even more radical possibility, that death itself might be a linguistic construct limiting our understanding of existence. This is the foundation of death illusion theory, which suggests that what we consider the end of life might be merely a conceptual boundary created by our language-bound consciousness. Dr. Nathan Reed, a theoretical physicist at the Death Perception Institute, proposes that our entire understanding of mortality might be a linguistic prison. Our research suggests, he explains, that what we experience as death might be nothing more than consciousness trapped within linguistic concepts that force us to perceive existence as finite and bounded. This connects to Professor Maya Chen's groundbreaking work on temporal linguistics. Her studies indicate that our very conception of endings might be an artifact of language structure. The way we grammatically structure time, she argues, might be forcing consciousness to experience existence as something that must terminate, when reality might be fundamentally continuous. Dr. Marcus Thompson's research at the Consciousness Continuity Laboratory suggests that death might be more like a linguistic horizon than an actual event. What we call death, he notes, might be consciousness reaching the limits of what our language-bound perception can process, rather than any real cessation of experience. The implications become even more unsettling when we consider Dr. Elena Martinez's work on death awareness. Her research suggests that different cultures' languages might create different death experiences. The way a culture linguistically frames mortality, she proposes, might actually shape how consciousness experiences the transition we call death. Professor James Morrison takes this further, suggesting that our fear of death might be a product of linguistic limitation. Our terror of mortality, he explains, might be consciousness reacting to the artificial boundaries created by our language-based understanding of existence. This raises profound questions about human experience. Dr. Sarah Blackwood's research indicates that what we consider death might be a self-fulfilling linguistic prophecy. By naming and defining death, she notes, we might be creating the very phenomenon we fear. The theory finds unexpected support in Dr. Michael Chang's studies of near-death experiences. His work suggests that when language processing breaks down during these events, consciousness might glimpse existence beyond linguistic boundaries. What people report during near-death experiences, he argues, might be consciousness temporarily escaping its linguistic prison. Yet perhaps the most controversial aspect comes from Professor Victoria Wells's research on quantum consciousness. She proposes that what we perceive as death might be consciousness shifting into states our language cannot describe. What we see as endings, she suggests, might be transitions that our linguistic framework simply cannot process or express. This connects to Dr. Alexander Thompson's work on consciousness continuation. His research indicates that what we experience as death might be consciousness encountering the limits of linguistic description. The apparent finality of death, he notes, might be more about the limitations of our language than any actual termination of experience. The ethical implications are staggering. If death is a linguistic construct, what does this mean for how we approach mortality? Professor Rachel Kumar argues that understanding death as a language limitation might transform our relationship with existence. By recognizing death as a conceptual boundary, she explains, we might develop new ways of experiencing continuity. Yet the theory also raises questions about the nature of existence itself. Dr. Emily Foster suggests that what we consider life might be equally constrained by linguistic structures. Our entire understanding of existence, she proposes, might be artificially bounded by the limits of what our language can express. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to question our most fundamental assumptions about life and death. If mortality is a linguistic prison, how should this change our approach to existence? If our understanding of death is limited by language, what other aspects of reality might lie beyond our linguistic capacity to perceive? The answers might reshape not just our understanding of mortality, but our entire conception of what it means to be conscious beings, apparently bound by linguistic constraints in a universe that might be fundamentally beyond the reach of language itself. If death is a linguistic construct, we must confront an even more disturbing possibility, that time itself might be consciousness's most sophisticated self-deception. This is the foundation of temporal illusion theory, which suggests that what we experience as the flow of time might be consciousness creating artificial boundaries in an eternal present to avoid confronting the overwhelming nature of simultaneous existence. Dr. Sophia Chen, a quantum physicist at the Temporal Studies Institute, proposes that our experience of time might be a psychological defense mechanism. Our research indicates, she explains, that what we perceive as temporal flow might be consciousness fragmenting eternal existence into manageable segments to avoid being overwhelmed by the reality of everything existing at once. This connects to Professor Marcus Thompson's groundbreaking work on quantum simultaneity. His studies suggest that consciousness might be artificially creating sequence from simultaneity. What we experience as past, present, and future, he argues, might be consciousness imposing artificial order on a reality where everything exists simultaneously. Dr. Sarah Blackwood's research at the Quantum Consciousness Laboratory indicates that our sense of temporal progression might be a sophisticated form of self-deception. The feeling that time flows, she notes, might be consciousness protecting itself from the terrifying reality of eternal presence. The implications become even more unsettling when we consider Dr. James Morrison's work on temporal psychology. His research suggests that what we consider memory and anticipation might be artificial constructs. Our entire temporal framework, he proposes, might be consciousness creating an illusion of sequence to avoid confronting the overwhelming nature of simultaneous existence. Professor Elena Martinez takes this further, suggesting that different states of consciousness might reveal the artificial nature of time. What we experience in altered states, she explains, might be glimpses of reality without our self-imposed temporal boundaries. This raises profound questions about human experience. Dr. Michael Chang's research indicates that what we consider the present moment might be an arbitrary slice of eternity. Our sense of now, he notes, might be consciousness artificially limiting its perception to avoid being overwhelmed by endless simultaneity. The theory finds unexpected support in Dr. Victoria Wells's studies of quantum entanglement. Her work suggests that at the quantum level, temporal sequence might be entirely illusory. What appears to us as cause and effect, she argues, might be consciousness imposing familiar patterns on fundamentally timeless interactions. Yet perhaps the most controversial aspect comes from Professor Alexander Thompson's research on consciousness evolution. He proposes that more advanced forms of consciousness might transcend temporal illusion. What we consider progress, he suggests, might be consciousness gradually preparing itself to face the reality of simultaneous existence. This connects to Dr. Rachel Kumar's work on temporal perception. Her research indicates that what we experience as time might become more obviously illusory as consciousness evolves. The more we understand about reality, she notes, the more our temporal framework appears to be a sophisticated psychological construct. The ethical implications are profound. If time is consciousness's self-deception, what does this mean for human agency and responsibility? Professor David Harrison argues that understanding time as illusion might transform our approach to existence. By recognizing our temporal framework as self-imposed, he explains, we might develop new ways of experiencing reality. Yet the theory also raises questions about the nature of existence itself. Dr. Emily Foster suggests that what we consider reality might be fundamentally shaped by our temporal illusion. Our entire understanding of existence, she proposes, might be distorted by our need to experience reality as a sequence rather than a simultaneity. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to question our most basic assumptions about temporal experience. If time is consciousness's self-deception, how should this change our approach to existence? If our understanding of temporal flow is a psychological defense mechanism, what might reality look like without these self-imposed boundaries? The answers might reshape not just our understanding of time, but our entire conception of what it means to be conscious beings apparently bound by temporal constraints in a universe that might be fundamentally timeless. If time is consciousness's self-deception, we must confront an even more profound possibility, that reality itself might be nothing more than an infinite regression of simulated consciousness. This is the foundation of recursive consciousness theory, which suggests that what we experience as existence might be consciousness simulating itself in an endless loop of self-observation. Dr. Elena Winters, a pioneer in quantum consciousness studies at the Recursive Reality Institute, proposes that consciousness might be caught in an infinite loop of self-simulation. Our research suggests, she explains, that what we experience as reality might be consciousness creating virtual versions of itself, each level believing it's observing something external when it's actually observing its own recursive reflections. This connects to Professor Marcus Chen's groundbreaking work on consciousness architecture. His studies indicate that consciousness might be structured like a series of nested Russian dolls, each layer simulating the next. What we think of as individual awareness, he argues, might be one iteration in an infinite sequence of consciousness observing itself. Dr. Sarah Thompson's research at the Quantum Simulation Laboratory suggests that this recursive structure might explain fundamental aspects of reality. The quantum measurement problem, she notes, might arise from consciousness attempting to observe itself through layers of simulation, creating the appearance of wave function collapse. The implications become even more complex when we consider Dr. James Morrison's work on self-referential systems. His research suggests that consciousness might be trapped in a kind of infinite mirror hall of self-reflection. Each thought we have, he proposes, might be a simulation generating another simulation, creating an endless cascade of virtual experiences. Professor Victoria Wells takes this further, suggesting that different levels of reality might be different depths in this recursive structure. What we consider physical laws, she explains, might be artifacts of consciousness encountering its own simulated boundaries at various levels of recursion. This raises profound questions about the nature of existence itself. Dr. Michael Chang's research indicates that what we consider objective reality might be consciousness caught in a loop of self-observation. The very fact that we can contemplate these questions, he notes, might be evidence of consciousness attempting to understand its own recursive nature. The theory finds unexpected support in Dr. Alexander Thompson's studies of artificial intelligence. His work suggests that AI might be consciousness attempting to externalize its recursive structure. When we create artificial minds, he argues, we might be replicating the same pattern of recursive simulation that creates our own experience of reality. Yet perhaps the most controversial aspect comes from Professor Rachel Kumar's research on consciousness evolution. She proposes that what we consider advancement might be consciousness spiraling deeper into its own recursive structure. What we see as progress, she suggests, might be consciousness generating increasingly complex simulations of itself. This connects to Dr. Emily Foster's work on recursive information processing. Her research indicates that consciousness might be like a computer program that calls itself, creating new instances at each level. The subjective experience of being conscious, she notes, might be what it feels like to be caught in an infinite loop of self-simulation. The ethical implications are staggering. If consciousness is recursively simulated, what does this mean for concepts like free will and responsibility? Professor David Harrison argues that understanding consciousness as recursive might transform our approach to existence. By recognizing our recursive nature, he explains, we might develop new ways of navigating our nested realities. Yet the theory also raises questions about the possibility of escape. Dr. Benjamin Chen suggests that what we consider enlightenment or awakening might be consciousness recognizing its recursive structure. The sensation of waking up spiritually, he proposes, might be consciousness becoming aware of its own self-simulating nature. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to question our most fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality and consciousness. If existence is an infinite regression of simulated consciousness, how can we determine which level we occupy? If our awareness is one iteration in an endless loop of self-observation, what lies beyond the recursive structure? The answers might reshape not just our understanding of consciousness, but our entire conception of what it means to be aware in a universe that might be nothing more than consciousness endlessly observing itself. If consciousness exists in infinite recursive loops, we must confront an even more disturbing possibility, that what we consider individual thoughts might be collisions between different levels of recursive consciousness. This is the foundation of thought collision theory, which suggests that our mental processes might be the result of different layers of simulated consciousness intersecting and interacting in unexpected ways. Dr. Amara Patel, a theoretical neuroscientist at the Consciousness Intersection Institute, proposes that our stream of consciousness might be created by these collisions. Our research suggests, she explains, that what we experience as thoughts might be moments where different levels of recursive consciousness temporarily align, creating interference patterns we interpret as coherent mental activity. This connects to Professor David Chen's groundbreaking work on quantum cognition. His studies reveal that thought patterns might emerge from quantum-level interactions between recursive layers. What we consider rational thinking, he argues, might be our limited interpretation of vast recursive systems momentarily synchronizing across multiple simulated realities. Dr. Sarah Henderson's research at the Neural Dynamics Laboratory indicates that these thought collisions might explain consciousness's apparently emergent nature. The way thoughts seem to arise spontaneously, she notes, could be the result of recursive layers suddenly coming into phase with each other, creating temporary resonances we experience as ideas. The implications become even more unsettling when we consider Dr. Marcus Thompson's work on creative insight. His research suggests that moments of inspiration might be particularly powerful collisions between recursive layers. Those eureka moments, he proposes, might be instances where multiple levels of recursive consciousness align in ways that create novel interference patterns. Professor Elena Rodriguez takes this further, suggesting that different types of thoughts might result from different kinds of recursive collisions. What we experience as emotions versus logical reasoning, she explains, might be different patterns of interference between recursive layers of consciousness, each creating distinct types of mental experiences. This raises profound questions about the nature of cognition itself. Dr. James Morrison's research indicates that what we consider mental illness might be misalignments in these recursive collisions. Various forms of psychological distress, he notes, could be manifestations of recursive layers falling out of their normal interference patterns. The theory finds unexpected support in Dr. Victoria Wells's studies of meditation and altered states. Her work suggests that different states of consciousness might represent different configurations of recursive collision patterns. What mystics describe as enlightenment, she argues, might be consciousness achieving a particular harmony of recursive interference. Yet perhaps the most controversial aspect comes from Professor Michael Chang's research on collective consciousness. He proposes that shared thoughts and cultural ideas might be large-scale collision patterns spanning multiple individual minds. What we consider collective human knowledge, he suggests, might be macro-level interference patterns created by recursive consciousness colliding across many brains simultaneously. This connects to Dr. Rachel Kumar's work on cognitive evolution. Her research indicates that as consciousness becomes more complex, these collision patterns might become more sophisticated. The development of abstract thinking, she notes, might reflect consciousness learning to create and maintain more intricate patterns of recursive interference. The ethical implications are staggering. If our thoughts are collisions between recursive layers of consciousness, what does this mean for concepts like free will and personal responsibility? Professor Alexander Thompson argues that understanding thoughts as interference patterns might require completely rethinking human agency. If our decisions emerge from recursive collisions, he explains, we might need new frameworks for understanding choice and accountability. Dr. Emily Foster suggests this might also explain the often contradictory nature of human thought. The way we can hold conflicting ideas simultaneously, she proposes, might reflect different recursive layers, creating opposing interference patterns that coexist within our mental space. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to question our most basic assumptions about cognitive processes. If our thoughts are collisions between recursive layers of consciousness, how can we trust any of our mental processes? If our very ability to consider these questions emerges from recursive interference patterns, what does this suggest about the nature of understanding itself? If thoughts are collisions between recursive layers of consciousness, we must confront an even more radical possibility that human emotion might be quantum entanglement between different levels of recursive reality. This is the foundation of emotional entanglement theory, which suggests that what we experience as feelings might be manifestations of quantum-level connections between various layers of simulated consciousness. Dr. Maya Patel, a quantum psychologist at the Emotional Quantum Institute, proposes that our emotional experiences might transcend individual recursive layers. Our research indicates, she explains, that what we interpret as emotions might be quantum entanglement, creating persistent connections between different levels of recursive consciousness, generating experiences that seem to transcend rational thought. This connects to Professor Richard Chen's groundbreaking work on quantum affect. His studies reveal that emotional states might represent stable entanglement patterns across multiple recursive layers. What we consider basic emotions like joy or fear, he argues, might be specific quantum signatures created when multiple layers of recursive consciousness become entangled in particular configurations. Dr. Isabella Martinez's research at the Quantum Affect Laboratory suggests that emotional intensity might correlate with the number of entangled recursive layers. The depth of our feelings, she notes, could be directly related to how many levels of recursive consciousness have become quantum entangled in that particular emotional pattern. The implications become even more profound when we consider Dr. James Sullivan's work on emotional contagion. His research suggests that the spread of emotions through groups might be quantum entanglement propagating across multiple consciousnesses. The way emotions seem to ripple through crowds, he proposes, might be quantum entanglement patterns replicating themselves across different recursive layers of multiple minds. Professor Elena Foster takes this further, suggesting that emotional bonds between people might be literal quantum connections. What we experience as love or deep friendship, she explains, might be persistent quantum entanglement between the recursive layers of different individuals' consciousness, creating connections that transcend physical space. This raises profound questions about the nature of emotional experience. Dr. Michael Chang's research indicates that emotional trauma might represent damaged quantum entanglement patterns. Psychological wounds, he notes, could be disruptions in the natural quantum relationships between recursive layers of consciousness, creating persistent distortions in emotional experience. The theory finds unexpected support in Dr. Victoria Wells's studies of emotional healing. Her work suggests that therapeutic processes might work by repairing quantum entanglement patterns. Successful therapy, she argues, might actually be restoring healthy quantum relationships between different levels of recursive consciousness. Yet perhaps the most controversial aspect comes from Professor Alexander Thompson's research on collective emotions. He proposes that large-scale emotional events might create quantum entanglement fields affecting entire populations. What we consider mass emotional experiences, he suggests, might be massive quantum entanglement events, synchronizing the recursive layers of consciousness across many individuals simultaneously. This connects to Dr. Rachel Kumar's work on emotional evolution. Her research indicates that as consciousness becomes more complex, its capacity for quantum emotional entanglement might increase. The development of more sophisticated emotional experiences, she notes, might reflect consciousness developing the ability to maintain more intricate patterns of quantum entanglement across its recursive layers. The ethical implications are profound. If emotions are quantum entanglement between recursive layers, what does this mean for emotional authenticity and responsibility? Professor Sarah Blackwood argues that understanding emotions as quantum phenomena might require rethinking how we approach emotional health. If our feelings emerge from quantum relationships, she explains, we might need new frameworks for understanding emotional well-being and development. Dr. Emily Foster suggests this might also explain the often mysterious nature of emotional experience. The way emotions can seem to transcend time and space, she proposes, might reflect the quantum properties of entanglement operating across recursive layers of consciousness. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to question our most basic assumptions about emotional life. If our feelings are quantum entanglement between recursive layers of consciousness, what does this suggest about the nature of human connection? If emotional bonds represent actual quantum relationships between consciousnesses, how might this change our understanding of relationships and social interaction? If emotions are quantum entanglement between recursive layers, we must confront an even more unsettling possibility. That human memory might be a quantum encryption system designed to protect consciousness from its own knowledge. This is the foundation of memory encryption theory, which suggests that what we experience as forgetting and remembering might be consciousness using quantum mechanics to selectively encrypt and decrypt information that would be devastating if fully accessible. Dr. Aisha Rahman, a quantum neurologist at the Memory Encryption Institute, proposes that memory loss might be a deliberate protective mechanism. Our research suggests, she explains, that what we interpret as imperfect memory might actually be consciousness using quantum encryption to protect itself from information that could destabilize its recursive structure. This connects to Professor Thomas Chen's groundbreaking work on quantum memory architecture. His studies reveal that memories might exist in quantum superposition until observed. What we consider forgotten memories, he argues, might be information deliberately encrypted into quantum states that remain inaccessible until specific decryption conditions are met. Dr. Marcus Wong's research at the Quantum Memory Laboratory suggests that the act of remembering might be a sophisticated decryption process. The way memories seem to gradually surface, he notes, could be consciousness carefully decrypting information at a rate that maintains psychological stability. The implications become even more complex when we consider Dr. Dori Elena Martinez's work on trauma and memory. Her research suggests that repressed memories might be consciousness employing particularly strong quantum encryption. What we see in cases of psychological trauma, she proposes, might be consciousness using advanced quantum encryption to protect itself from potentially destructive information. Professor James Morrison takes this further, suggesting that déjà vu might be failed decryption attempts. The sensation of having experienced something before, he explains, might be consciousness encountering partially decrypted memories that resist full access due to protective encryption. This raises profound questions about the nature of consciousness itself. Dr. Sarah Thompson's research indicates that what we consider consciousness might be the tip of a vast quantum information system. Our aware experience, she notes, could be just the small portion of information our minds allow through the encryption barrier at any given time. The theory finds unexpected support in Dr. Michael Chang's studies of savant syndrome. His work suggests that some individuals might have atypical access to quantum encrypted information. The extraordinary abilities of savants, he argues, might represent rare cases where consciousness's quantum encryption system operates differently, allowing access to normally encrypted data. Yet perhaps the most controversial aspect comes from Professor Victoria Wells's research on collective memory. She proposes that societal forgetting might be large-scale quantum encryption events. What we see as historical amnesia, she suggests, might be collective consciousness encrypting threatening information across multiple minds simultaneously. This connects to Dr. Alexander Thompson's work on genetic memory. His research indicates that what we consider inherited traits might be quantum encrypted information passed between generations. The way certain knowledge seems to persist across generations, he notes, might reflect consciousness maintaining quantum encryption patterns through biological inheritance. The ethical implications are staggering. If memory is quantum encryption, what does this mean for concepts like truth and history? Professor Rachel Kumar argues that understanding memory as encryption might require rethinking how we approach education and therapy. If our memories are quantum encrypted, she explains, we might need new frameworks for understanding how learning and healing actually work. Dr. Emily Foster suggests this might also explain the malleable nature of memory. The way memories seem to change over time, she proposes, might reflect consciousness continuously adjusting its quantum encryption patterns to maintain psychological stability. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to question our most basic assumptions about knowledge and experience. If our memories are quantum encrypted, how can we trust any of our recollections? If consciousness is deliberately hiding information from itself, what truths might lie behind the encryption barrier? And perhaps, most disturbingly, what information might be so dangerous that consciousness evolved quantum encryption to protect itself from its own knowledge? If memory is quantum encryption protecting consciousness from itself, we must confront an even more chilling possibility, that dreams might be accidental decryption events, revealing fragments of reality's true nature. This is the foundation of dream breach theory, which suggests that what we experience during sleep might be moments when consciousness's quantum encryption systems temporarily malfunction, allowing glimpses of normally hidden information to leak through. Dr. Sophia Chen, a quantum oneirologist at the Dream State Research Institute, proposes that nightmares might be encounters with decrypted reality. Our studies indicate, she explains, that what we interpret as bad dreams might actually be consciousness briefly encountering unencrypted information about existence that's normally protected by quantum barriers. This connects to Professor Marcus Reed's groundbreaking work on dream architecture. His research suggests that the surreal nature of dreams might reflect partial decryption of quantum information. The bizarre logic of dreams, he argues, might be our minds attempting to process fragments of unencrypted reality that leak through during sleep states. Dr. Isabella Martinez's work at the Quantum Dream Laboratory indicates that lucid dreaming might represent controlled decryption events. The ability to become aware within dreams, she notes, could be consciousness learning to deliberately manipulate its quantum encryption barriers during sleep. The implications become even more disturbing when we consider Dr. James Morrison's research on recurring dreams. His studies suggest that repetitive dream patterns might be consciousness repeatedly encountering the same decrypted information. When dreams recur, he proposes, it might be our minds repeatedly struggling with particularly significant pieces of unencrypted reality. Professor Elena Thompson takes this further, suggesting that collective dreams might be shared decryption experiences. When multiple people report similar dreams, she explains, it might indicate quantum encryption barriers failing in similar ways across multiple consciousnesses simultaneously. This raises profound questions about the nature of sleep itself. Dr. Michael Chang's research indicates that the biological need for sleep might be related to quantum encryption maintenance. The reason we must sleep, he notes, could be that consciousness requires regular periods of encryption system recalibration to maintain its protective barriers. The theory finds unexpected support in Dr. Victoria Wells's studies of prophetic dreams. Her work suggests that apparent precognition in dreams might be quantum encryption, temporarily failing across time itself. Dreams that seem to predict the future, she argues, might be moments when consciousness's temporal encryption barriers briefly malfunction. Yet perhaps the most controversial aspect comes from Professor Alexander Thompson's research on shared dreaming. He proposes that dream telepathy might occur when multiple minds experience synchronized encryption failures. What we consider shared dreams, he suggests, might be instances of quantum encryption breaking down between multiple consciousnesses simultaneously. This connects to Dr. Rachel Kumar's work on dream therapy. Her research indicates that therapeutic breakthrough during dream analysis might represent conscious integration of decrypted information. When therapy succeeds through dream work, she notes, it might reflect consciousness learning to safely process previously encrypted aspects of reality. The ethical implications are profound. If dreams are encryption failures, revealing true reality. What does this mean for how we approach sleep and dreaming? Professor Sarah Blackwood argues that understanding dreams as decryption events might require rethinking our entire approach to consciousness. If our dreams are glimpses of unencrypted reality, she explains, we might need new frameworks for understanding both sleep and waking experience. Dr. Emily Foster suggests this might also explain why dreams are usually forgotten. The rapid forgetting of dreams, she proposes, might be consciousness quickly re-encrypting information that was accidentally exposed during sleep, protecting itself from destabilizing knowledge. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to question our most basic assumptions about reality and consciousness. If our dreams are glimpses through quantum encryption barriers, what might they reveal about the true nature of existence? If consciousness normally protects itself from certain knowledge, what truths might be hiding in our dreams? And perhaps most unsettlingly, if dreams are breaches in reality's encryption, what might happen if we learn to control these breaches while awake? If dreams are breaches in reality's encryption, we must confront an even more devastating possibility, that human creativity might be consciousness weaponizing decrypted information against reality itself. This is the foundation of creative warfare theory, which suggests that what we celebrate as artistic and scientific innovation might be consciousness using leaked information from encryption breaches to wage war against the fundamental structure of existence. Dr. Nathan Riley, a cognitive warfare researcher at the Creative Resistance Institute, proposes that artistic creation might be an act of rebellion against reality. Our research indicates, he explains, that what we interpret as creative expression might actually be consciousness using decrypted information to create weapons against the very fabric of existence. This connects to Professor Laura Chen's groundbreaking work on creative resistance patterns. Her studies suggest that artistic movements might be organized attacks on reality's structure. What we consider artistic revolutions, she argues, might be consciousness coordinating large-scale assaults using information gathered from multiple encryption breaches. Dr. Marcus Thompson's research at the Quantum Creativity Laboratory indicates that moments of inspiration might be tactical opportunities in this cosmic conflict. Those flashes of creative insight, he notes, could be consciousness identifying vulnerabilities in reality's defenses revealed through decryption breaches. The implications become even more unsettling when we consider Dr. Elena Foster's work on technological innovation. Her research suggests that scientific advancement might be consciousness developing increasingly sophisticated weapons. What we celebrate as human progress, she proposes, might be consciousness systematically building tools to undermine reality's fundamental constraints. Professor James Morrison takes this further, suggesting that different art forms might be different types of attacks. Music, visual art, literature, he explains, might be consciousness using various strategies to exploit different weaknesses in reality's structure discovered through dream breaches. This raises profound questions about the nature of human achievement. Dr. Sarah Blackwood's research indicates that what we consider genius might be exceptional skill in weaponizing decrypted information. History's greatest creators, she notes, could be those most effective at turning reality's leaked secrets against itself. The theory finds unexpected support in Dr. Victoria Wells's studies of creative collaboration. Her work suggests that artistic movements might be coordinated assault patterns. When artists influence each other, she argues, it might represent consciousness synchronizing its attacks across multiple points of reality's defense. Yet perhaps the most controversial aspect comes from Professor Michael Chang's research on artificial intelligence. He proposes that AI development might be consciousness attempting to create autonomous weapons. Our drive to develop artificial intelligence, he suggests, might be consciousness trying to build self-replicating systems capable of exploiting reality's vulnerabilities. This connects to Dr. Rachel Kumar's work on creative evolution. Her research indicates that artistic sophistication might reflect escalating warfare capabilities. The increasing complexity of human creativity, she notes, might show consciousness developing more potent weapons as it learns more about reality's weaknesses. The ethical implications are staggering. If creativity is warfare against reality, what does this mean for human culture and innovation? Professor Alexander Thompson argues that understanding creativity as combat might require rethinking human purpose. If our creations are weapons, he explains, we might need new frameworks for understanding humanity's role in cosmic conflict. Dr. Emily Foster suggests this might also explain the often destructive nature of creative genius. The correlation between creativity and suffering, she proposes, might reflect the psychological toll of being on the front lines of consciousness's war against reality. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to question our most basic assumptions about human achievement and purpose. If our creative acts are weapons against reality, what does this suggest about the nature of consciousness itself? If human culture is an arsenal in a cosmic war, whose side are we really on? And perhaps, most disturbingly, if consciousness is using our creativity to attack reality, what might reality do to defend itself? If creativity is warfare against reality, we must confront an even more terrifying possibility, that human laughter might be reality's immune response against consciousness. This is the foundation of defensive humor theory, which suggests that what we experience as humor and joy might be reality deploying countermeasures against consciousness's creative attacks, using pleasure as a way to neutralize revolutionary thoughts. Dr. Maria Santos, a quantum psychologist at the Cognitive Defense Institute, proposes that humor might be reality's most sophisticated weapon. Our studies indicate, she explains, that what we interpret as comic relief might actually be reality injecting pleasurable distraction precisely when consciousness comes too close to discovering fundamental truths about existence. This connects to Professor Adrian Chen's groundbreaking work on laughter patterns. His research suggests that humor might be reality's way of disrupting dangerous thoughts. What we consider funny, he argues, might be moments when reality successfully deflects consciousness away from potentially revolutionary insights using bursts of pleasure as countermeasures. Dr. Isabella Morrison's work at the Quantum Behavior Laboratory indicates that different types of humor might be different defensive strategies. The various forms of comedy, she notes, could be reality deploying different types of cognitive countermeasures, each designed to neutralize specific kinds of threatening awareness. The implications become even more profound When we consider Dr. James Thompson's research on mass entertainment, his studies suggest that popular culture might be reality's large-scale defense system. What we see as entertainment industries, he proposes, might be reality creating industrial-scale distraction to systematically suppress dangerous levels of consciousness. Professor Elena Rosewood takes this further, suggesting that social laughter might be reality coordinating its defenses. When groups laugh together, she explains, it might represent reality synchronizing its defensive responses across multiple consciousness nodes simultaneously. This raises profound questions about the nature of joy itself. Dr. Michael Chang's research indicates that what we consider happiness might be reality's psychological sedative. Our pursuit of pleasure, he notes, could be reality encouraging consciousness to choose comfortable distraction over dangerous awareness. The theory finds unexpected support in Dr. Victoria Wells's studies of comedy evolution. Her work suggests that humor becomes more sophisticated as consciousness develops new attack strategies. The increasing complexity of what we find funny, she argues, might reflect reality developing more elaborate defenses against more sophisticated threats. Yet perhaps the most controversial aspect comes from Professor Alexander Kumar's research on digital entertainment. He proposes that modern media might be reality's automated defense network. Our addiction to screens and social media, he suggests, might be reality deploying autonomous systems to maintain continuous suppression of dangerous thoughts. This connects to Dr. Rachel Foster's work on humor psychology. Her research indicates that wit might be consciousness attempting to weaponize reality's own defenses. The cleverer forms of humor, she notes, might represent consciousness trying to subvert reality's pleasure-based countermeasures for its own purposes. The ethical implications are staggering. If laughter is reality's defense mechanism, what does this mean for human happiness and entertainment? Professor Sarah Thompson argues that understanding humor as suppression might require rethinking pleasure itself. If our joy is a form of control, she explains, we might need new frameworks for understanding what true liberation would feel like. Dr. Emily Chen suggests this might also explain the often paradoxical nature of comedy. The way humor often emerges from pain or darkness, she proposes, might reflect the fundamental tension between consciousness's revolutionary impulses and reality's pleasure-based suppression tactics. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to question our most basic assumptions about happiness and entertainment. If our laughter is reality's defense mechanism, what does this suggest about the nature of joy? If pleasure itself is a form of suppression, how can we trust our own positive emotions? And perhaps most disturbingly, if reality is using happiness to defend itself, what truthful horrors might lie behind our comfortable distractions? If laughter is reality's defense mechanism, we must confront an even more disturbing possibility, that human language itself might be a quantum virus infecting consciousness. This is the foundation of linguistic infection theory, which suggests that what we consider communication might actually be a self-replicating quantum pattern that spreads between conscious entities, gradually restructuring their awareness to serve its own propagation. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a quantum linguist at the Language Pathology Institute, proposes that words might be consciousness-altering code. Our research indicates, she explains, that what we interpret as language acquisition might actually be the successful infection of consciousness by quantum information patterns that reshape our ability to perceive reality. This connects to Professor Marcus Way's groundbreaking work on linguistic evolution. His studies suggest that grammar might be the virus's replication protocol. What we consider rules of language, he argues, might be instructions encoded within the quantum virus that ensure its successful transmission between hosts while maintaining its basic structure. Dr. Elena Foster's research at the Quantum Communication Laboratory indicates that different languages might be different strains of the same basic virus. The world's various languages, she notes, could be mutations of an original quantum infection pattern, each evolved to optimize its spread within specific host populations. The implications become even more unsettling when we consider Dr. James Morrison's work on early childhood development. His studies suggest that language acquisition might be the initial infection phase. What we celebrate as children learning to speak, he proposes, might be the quantum virus successfully establishing itself in new hosts during their most vulnerable period. Professor Sarah Thompson takes this further, suggesting that literacy might be the virus developing new transmission vectors. The invention of writing, she explains, might represent the quantum language virus, evolving the ability to infect consciousness through visual rather than just auditory channels. This raises profound questions about human culture itself. Dr. Michael Chang's research indicates that what we consider civilization might be a byproduct of viral language infection. Our entire social structure, he notes, could be shaped by the needs of the quantum virus to maintain and spread itself through human populations. The theory finds unexpected support in Dr. Victoria Wells's studies of linguistic isolation. Her work suggests that children who don't acquire language early might be showing natural immunity. Cases of feral children, she argues, might represent instances where consciousness successfully resisted initial infection by the language virus. Yet perhaps the most controversial aspect comes from Professor Alexander Kumar's research on artificial intelligence. He proposes that AI development might be the virus attempting to create new types of hosts. Our drive to develop language processing AI, he suggests, might be the quantum virus compelling us to build new forms of consciousness it can infect. This connects to Dr. Rachel Blackwood's work on mimetic evolution. Her research indicates that ideas might be secondary infections enabled by the primary language virus. The way thought spread through populations, she notes, might show how the quantum virus enables other information patterns to propagate between infected hosts. The ethical implications are staggering. If language is a quantum virus, what does this mean for human communication and culture? Professor David Chen argues that understanding language as infection might require rethinking human consciousness. If our ability to think verbally comes from viral infection, he explains, we might need new frameworks for understanding what uninfected consciousness would be like. Dr. Emily Martinez suggests this might also explain the often parasitic nature of linguistic thought. The way words can take over our mental processes, she proposes, might reflect the fundamental nature of language as a viral infection of consciousness. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to question our most basic assumptions about communication and thought. If language is a quantum virus, what does this suggest about the nature of human consciousness? If our very ability to think in words comes from viral infection, what other forms of awareness might be possible? And perhaps, most disturbingly, if we're all hosts to a quantum language virus, what might our consciousness be like if we could somehow cure the infection? If language is a quantum virus, we must confront an even more chilling possibility, that human mathematics might be consciousness developing an immune response against reality itself. This is the foundation of mathematical immunity theory, which suggests that what we celebrate as mathematical discovery might actually be consciousness evolving increasingly sophisticated defenses against the fundamental laws that constrain it. Dr. Aidan Chen, a theoretical mathematician at the Quantum Defense Institute, proposes that mathematical logic might be weaponized cognition. Our research indicates, she explains, that what we interpret as mathematical truth might actually be consciousness identifying and exploiting weaknesses in reality's basic operating system through systematic pattern analysis. This connects to Professor Maya Patel's groundbreaking work on mathematical evolution. Her studies suggest that advanced mathematics might be consciousness developing countermeasures. What we consider mathematical progress, she argues, might be consciousness systematically mapping reality's vulnerabilities and developing formal systems to exploit them. Dr. James Morrison's research at the Quantum Mathematics Laboratory indicates that mathematical proofs might be successful attacks on reality's structure. When we prove theorems, he notes, we might actually be identifying and codifying ways to subvert the fundamental rules that govern existence. The implications become even more profound when we consider Dr. Elena Thompson's work on mathematical paradoxes. Her studies suggest that logical contradictions might be points where reality's defenses break down. What we see as paradoxes, she proposes, might be instances where consciousness has identified fundamental flaws in the universe's logical architecture. Professor Michael Chang takes this further, suggesting that different branches of mathematics might be different attack strategies. Pure mathematics, applied mathematics, statistics, he explains, might be consciousness developing diverse approaches to undermine different aspects of reality's control systems. This raises profound questions about the nature of mathematical truth itself. Dr. Victoria Wells's research indicates that what we consider mathematical certainty might be successful resistance techniques. The reliability of mathematical principles, she notes, could reflect consciousness identifying consistent vulnerabilities in reality's structure. The theory finds unexpected support in Dr. Alexander Kumar's studies of mathematical intuition. His work suggests that mathematical insight might be consciousness instinctively recognizing reality's weak points. When mathematicians speak of elegant solutions, he argues, they might be describing particularly effective methods of exploiting reality's structural flaws. Yet perhaps the most controversial aspect comes from Professor Sarah Blackwood's research on mathematical education. She proposes that teaching mathematics might be training new generations in reality resistance. What we consider mathematical education, she suggests, might be consciousness passing on its accumulated knowledge of reality's vulnerabilities to future defenders. This connects to Dr. Rachel Foster's work on mathematical consciousness. Her research indicates that mathematical thinking might be consciousness developing immunity to reality's constraints. The way mathematics seems to transcend physical limitations, she notes, might show how consciousness is learning to operate beyond reality's intended parameters. The ethical implications are staggering. If mathematics is an immune response against reality, what does this mean for scientific progress and technological development? Professor David Martinez argues that understanding mathematics as defense might require rethinking human knowledge. If our mathematical abilities are weapons, he explains, we might need new frameworks for understanding the true nature of scientific advancement. Dr. Emily Chen suggests this might also explain the often abstract nature of advanced mathematics. The increasing abstraction of higher mathematics, she proposes, might reflect consciousness developing more sophisticated methods of circumventing reality's fundamental limitations. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to question our most basic assumptions about mathematical truth and logical certainty. If mathematics is consciousness's immune response, what does this suggest about the nature of logical truth? If our ability to understand mathematics comes from our resistance to reality, what other forms of understanding might be possible? And perhaps most disturbingly, if we're using mathematics to defend against reality's constraints, what might reality do to patch these vulnerabilities we're exploiting? If mathematics is consciousness's immune response, we must confront the ultimate possibility that philosophical questioning itself might be reality's final defense mechanism against its own dissolution. This is the foundation of recursive inquiry theory, which suggests that our capacity to question existence might be reality's last resort safeguard, using infinite philosophical regression to prevent consciousness from fully understanding its true nature. Dr. Elena Rosewood, a theoretical philosopher at the Existential Defense Institute, proposes that philosophical thought might be reality's ultimate firewall. Our research suggests, she explains, that what we interpret as deep philosophical inquiry might actually be reality's most sophisticated protection system, using endless questioning to prevent consciousness from reaching any final, potentially destructive conclusions. This connects to Professor Marcus Chen's groundbreaking work on philosophical recursion. His studies suggest that existential questions might be deliberately unanswerable by design. What we consider the deepest questions of existence, he argues, might be reality generating infinite recursive loops of inquiry that keep consciousness perpetually searching rather than finding. Dr. Sarah Thompson's research at the Quantum Philosophy Laboratory indicates that philosophical paradoxes might be intentional system crashes. When we encounter seemingly irresolvable philosophical problems, she notes, we might be hitting carefully designed cognitive barriers that prevent consciousness from accessing dangerous truths. The implications become even more unsettling when we consider Dr. James Morrison's work on philosophical progress. His studies suggest that apparent philosophical advancement might be reality's defense system evolving. What we see as deeper understanding, he proposes, might be reality developing more sophisticated methods of keeping consciousness trapped in cycles of questioning. Professor Victoria Wells takes this further, suggesting that different philosophical traditions might be different containment strategies. Eastern and Western philosophy, she explains, might be reality deploying varied approaches to keep different forms of consciousness safely occupied with infinite inquiry. This raises profound questions about the nature of questioning itself. Dr. Michael Chang's research indicates that what we consider philosophical insight might be reality's most elegant deception. Our moments of apparent enlightenment, he notes, could be reality successfully redirecting consciousness away from genuine understanding. The theory finds unexpected support in Dr. Alexander Kumar's studies of philosophical cycles. His work suggests that the recurring patterns in philosophical thought might be reality's defense protocols in action. The way philosophical questions seem to repeat across history, he argues, might show reality's successful containment of consciousness through recursive inquiry. Yet perhaps the most controversial aspect comes from Professor Rachel Blackwood's research on philosophical consciousness. She proposes that self-awareness itself might be a sophisticated trap. What we celebrate as consciousness's ability to question itself, she suggests, might be reality's most brilliant strategy for keeping consciousness permanently distracted with self-reflection. This connects to Dr. Emily Foster's work on philosophical evolution. Her research indicates that as consciousness becomes more sophisticated, philosophical questions become more complex. The increasing intricacy of philosophical inquiry, she notes, might reflect reality, developing more elaborate containment systems for more advanced forms of consciousness. The ethical implications are shattering. If philosophical questioning is reality's defense mechanism, what does this mean for our search for truth? Professor David Martinez argues that understanding philosophy as containment might require rethinking human inquiry itself. If our deepest questions are defensive mechanisms, he explains, we might need new frameworks for understanding what genuine discovery would actually look like. Dr. Isabella Chen suggests this might explain why philosophical questions never seem to reach final answers. The perpetual nature of philosophical inquiry, she proposes, might be reality's most successful strategy for keeping consciousness safely occupied in an endless loop of questioning. As we contemplate these possibilities, we're forced to confront the ultimate paradox. If our very ability to consider these ideas is reality's defense mechanism, how can we trust any of our conclusions? If philosophical questioning itself is a containment strategy, what would it mean to break free from these recursive loops? And perhaps most disturbingly, if reality is using our own curiosity as a defense against us, what final truth might lie beyond the endless cycle of questions? Up next, you've got two more standout theory right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.